So, as I said, welcome and to this meeting of the Scottish Police Authority, our first meeting in person in 2.5 years. I'm going to go straight into the business as we have a busy agenda. We have no apologies, is that correct? Thank you. I'd like to ask for any declarations of interest.
Chair, I wish to declare a connection in respect of item 14.2.1, the contract award for the leadership programme. I will not take part in the consideration of this item. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Are there any other declarations of interest or connection? Thank you. Are there any other items of business not on the agenda? I haven't been notified of any. Thank you very much. This is decisions taken in private. Can I have your agreement for the decisions being taken in private that are later on in the agenda? Thank you very much. Moving on to the minute and action from our previous meeting on the 23rd of June. Can I ask members to approve the draft minute of the last authority meeting? Thank you very much. We have a rolling action log of actions from our last meeting. Can I ask you to approve or comment on that action log? Firstly, any comments? If there are not, can I ask you to approve that action log? Thank you, and thank you for the staff for those. We now come to decisions since the last authority meeting on the 23rd of June, and to note that members approved via correspondence the establishment of a Forensic Services Toxicology Oversight Group, and the first meeting was held on the 4th of August 2022. Thank you very much. If I can, I want to move to the next item on the agenda, which is my own report to you. I'll take that report as read and ask for any questions, but I want to just take a minute or two to make a couple of statements first, and they are about our finances. And the authority is facing substantial shortfall in our budget for next year if the flat cash settlement is delivered as indicated. For clarity, the flat cash settlement translates into a substantial real-term reduction in the policing budget. Early assessments indicate a flat cash settlement would be at least £40 million short of the minimum requirement to cover only the most basic non-pay inflationary pressures. And the authority is working with Police Scotland to finalise the full financial impact. I am setting out this clearly today to say that the authority will be standing alongside Police Scotland in making the argument for real terms protection as to be reinstated. Now, I could, on behalf of the authority, advocate for this reinstatement on a number of grounds. For example, Police Scotland has been through a decade of structural reform, saving hundreds of millions of pounds to the taxpayer through reorganisation and replacing the 8 legacy forces with one national force. Another ground, that there are new and emerging threats and harms that add to the already high demands on police officers to keep us safe. But today I want to highlight just 2 grounds: fairness and social solidarity, grounds that citizens, civic and civil society will recognise. First and foremost, fairness. Policing, and indeed the wider justice system, are a core part of our national ambition to tackle inequality and vulnerability, an ambition to make Scotland fairer. Crime, as some of you will know very well, and some of you may not, is highly concentrated. Most of us have no crime committed against us from one year to the next. However, a startling 4% are subject to half of all crime. Effective policing is critical to their safety and well-being. My second ground is social solidarity. Confidence in policing has a strong correlation with the assurance that Police Scotland will respond to public concern in an effective and timely manner. The maintenance of a responsive and an effective 999 and 101 service is at the heart of that. To quote one writer, the capacity of all affected by harm or disorder to summon the police when they are threatened or violated and have the police come to their aid without fear or favour is a significant, hard-won and fragile historic achievement, as well as a telling indicator of social solidarity. There remain large parts of the globe where the ability to summon the state to offer emergency assistance does not exist or is partial or contested. Taking these millions of calls a year and responding to them is a 24-hour day, 365 days a year, and an extraordinary professional achievement by Police Scotland officers and staff. Responding well to calls for service is the bedrock of public trust and a building block of social solidarity. Now, we know these are tough times for public finances, private finances, and tough choices for parliamentarians across Scotland and the UK. And the authority will continue to work with Police Scotland to achieve even greater service improvement, more capacity gain, faster culture change, and ever-increasing efficient use of the police budget. In turn, the authority will ask that real terms protection is reinstated as promised and required to effectively manage and minimise the impact on policing. This will not be easy, and I emphasise the 40 million will cover only the most basic of non-pay inflationary pressures. It will fall short of the investment policing needs and wants to truly transform. Thank you for that. So in concluding my presentation of my chair's report to you, are there any comments or observations anybody would like to make on my report to you? Okay, thank you very much indeed. I'm now going to turn to the committee reports. Now, as I say at almost every meeting, these are the core of our work, goes on a very detailed basis through our committee structure involving all members, and I thank the chairs and the members. And I'm going to ask each chair to go through their committee report, which I will take as read, but anything they'd like to highlight in particular to the board today. So I'm going to come with Chair of Audit and Risk, Mary Pitcaithley first.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I'll take the report as read, although I'm happy to answer any questions, but I would like to highlight a couple of issues, one of which is under the heading of business continuity planning. And members will note that there is ongoing work in relation to the preparation of an overarching ICT business continuity plan. And that is something that the committee will keep an eye on and will report back to the board if there are any concerns. The other item relates to the annual report and accounts. Huge amount of work goes into the preparation of these documents. We're well on track to meet the timescales that are required of us, and the drafts were approved at the last meeting of the committee, and the final version of the reports will come to the next ARAC meeting and then to this board in September. Chair, that's all I want to say in relation to this report, but I would like to mention another couple of things, if that's okay. I've been advised that the SPA's Audit and Risk team has been shortlisted for a prestigious SIPFA Public Finance Award. This is for improvements in governance, risk management and reporting, with specific reference to work done on best value and assurance mapping. This is very well-deserved recognition of the work of the team over the last few years. I've also been advised that Police Scotland's COP26 Finance and Procurement team has also been shortlisted for Finance Team of the Year, central government and national bodies. Also very well deserved given the work that was required on COP26 finances. And I would want to wish both teams every success. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, and I too add my good wishes to those teams as they reach the finals of those prestigious awards. Next is Jane Ryder. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. As the previous chair of the Audit, Risk and Assurance Committee, I just want to say how pleased I am with that, particularly as I wrote the commendation. The proposal feels like a righteous vindication of all of the exceptionally hard work that was done while I was chair and continues under Mary as chair. The second thing was as legal committee, but actually there's nothing to comment on that. It was just a single case that we were looking at, but a very, very extended and useful discussion on that. Thank you.
I see a hand up. I'm just going to move through the committee chair's reports. Forensic Services Committee, Paul Eadie, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. We had a very lengthy agenda, and I'm going to pick out just 3 brief topics from that. The first was the issue of drug driving, and following on from the board's discussion about that at our last board meeting, the committee looked in more depth at this issue, and we also received updates on addressing the backlog. The Director, I'm sure, will be touching on that in more detail in her report, and I wouldn't want to steal her thunder on that. You also referenced at the beginning of the meeting the formation of a forensic toxicology oversight group, and that's going to work looking in more depth in this area, and also the transfer of morbid toxicology from Glasgow University. So we had an update on the first meeting of that. The post-mortem toxicology service transfer from Glasgow University we also looked at as well as a standing item. That's been an issue that's been going on for quite some time over the last, well, certainly since I joined the committee and before, and that should hopefully be completed by December. And again, in your report, you referenced the ministerial visit the other week to what will be the new service. So we received updates from that and a request that we get more frequent updates or more frequent attention to that until we get it across the line. The last thing I was going to touch on is the performance framework development. We did discuss performance reporting and the need for more meaningful measures, making sure that they are linked to outcomes and to the Police Scotland performance framework. And again, the intention is to have this delivered by the end of the financial year. So that's the 3 points I would hone in on.
Thank you very much, and thank you for agreeing to chair that oversight group. I'm very grateful to you and other board members for that and the support of our own corporate team to you for that committee. Thanks very much. No other comments on the chair's report. I'm now going to move on to the Chief Constable's report. Welcome to the meeting, Sir Ian. Delighted to see you in person, and thank you for your report.
Chair, thank you very much, and can I just concur with your opening comments about how welcome it is to be physically together again after 2.5 very, very difficult years for the whole of the country. But I do pay tribute to the police officers and police staff, and indeed the work of the Scottish Police Authority that sustained and prevailed over that period. There were a number of parts of public life where there was inevitable interruption, but actually policing is relentless, went on every day through the pandemic, as we know, but actually the work of the authority also went on, and that level of public accountability that is a key part of our governance through the Scottish Police Authority will also continued as well. It was done remotely, so again it is really, really heartening to be together physically, and again I just concur with some of your opening comments, Chair. The written report that you have, as always, Chair, has a significant amount of detail in it, but I would like to begin my comments this morning in regard to the critical incident involving firearms on Isle of Skye and in Wester Ross in early August. Now, as a result of those tragic events, John McKinnon, who was a 47-year-old father of 6, died, and 3 other people were injured. There was an immediate response by local officers, a brave response by local officers, as well as armed officers, supported by specialist resources and other emergency responders, which led ultimately to the arrest of a 39-year-old man. He has subsequently appeared at Inverness Sheriff Court. He's been charged with murder and 3 counts of attempted murder, and has been remanded in custody. It continues to be led by our major investigation team detectives, the inquiry, and local officers are continuing to offer support to their communities as well as themselves and other fellow responders who attended at the various scenes. This was a very tragic and extremely concerning incident in a remote part of Scotland, and of course is a very difficult time for John McKinnon's family. Such events are indeed very, very shocking, and upsetting for that local community and indeed for all of Scotland. Our thoughts, my thoughts, are with John's family and friends, the communities of Skye and Wester Ross, and I do pay tribute to the dignity, bravery and resilience of John's family and the wider community in that part of Scotland. You'll see in the detail of the report the police action and resulting outcomes to tackle serious sexual offending, to tackle domestic violence and abuse, and the supply of controlled drugs into our communities. Our vital police work right across the whole of Scotland resulted in the seizures, the arrests, and some of the custodial sentences that I have given by way of example in my report. And of course, the things that are outlined there are a snapshot over the period of time since I last reported of the dedicated and focused work undertaken by officers and staff right across Scotland to protect and to help their fellow citizens right across Scotland day in, day out. And I think, Chair, it's only right to point out that it's illustrated by the tragic and critical incident on Skye, as we've seen throughout the course of the pandemic period, as we've seen during COP26, both in regard to the conference and in regard to the policing that continued across the country at the time, and indeed all the cases and operations that are listed and provided in my report. Policing is truly relentless. And we know that there will always be further challenges ahead, some that we perhaps can anticipate, but others that will emerge in the coming months and years. But there are a number of others that are already clear to us. The cost of living crisis will undoubtedly have significant implications for the communities that we have the privilege to police, such as increased vulnerability and poverty, which of course can manifest in an increased role for public services, including policing. We keep such trends under close review to ensure that we continue to be responsive to community needs. And from that, protest, demonstration, unrest, and large gatherings in support of a particular cause may well become more frequent in the months and years ahead. Now, in this regard, Police Scotland, over a number of years, has often been placed in an invidious position by those calling for a certain response from the police service, depending on which group is making their voices heard. But as has been the case over those years, whether during sporting celebrations, environmental protests, or disruption of immigration operations, our response will continue to be proportionate in accordance with the rule of law and public safety, exercised through the professional judgment of experienced operational commanders. Now, as we discussed during the pandemic and throughout the COP26 period, with the additional advice and perspective from independent advisory groups, policing operations are not and must not be determined by the perceived public popularity of one group or another. Police Scotland will adhere to the rule of law and will act independently. And of course, constitutional debate will continue in the months and years ahead. Last week, there was evidence of what at the moment, at times, is a febrile political atmosphere. During the protests that we saw outside a Conservative Party leadership event that was held in Perth. Some of the behaviour was disgraceful. There was a policing operation in place around the event, and although we received no reports of assault or injury on the day, as is our usual practice, we are reviewing the event, and any criminality identified will be investigated and appropriate action taken as necessary. It is important, it is vital, that people in Scotland are able to go about their lives, including participating in politics, without intimidation. Everyone must exercise personal responsibility when making their voices heard, and I agree with all the political and civic leaders who have underlined that fundamental principle and who have called for robust but respectful debate. If there is criminality, for example, threatening an abusive behaviour or assault, we will take enforcement action without fear or favour. Energetic, passionate protest and campaigning is of course part of the legitimate democratic process that we are here to protect, irrespective of the political position being advanced. However, violence and threatening abuse does not constitute legitimate protest. As I said, Police Scotland will uphold the rule of law and ensure public safety, acting independently. And as Chief Constable, I am the custodian of the fundamental principle of the operational independence of the police service. In my view, this has been consistently demonstrated by Police Scotland over an extremely demanding period, whether that's in relation to public demonstrations, adherence to coronavirus legislation, or serious allegations of criminality, regardless of position or status. Operational independence, coupled with high levels of accountability, goes to the core of the Office of Chief Constable. I would firmly resist any attempt from any source to unduly influence that operational independence. The rule of law and public safety will determine the police approach in Scotland. Chair, as referenced in your written report, and again, as we've been having a number of conversations both with yourself and other members over recent weeks, we have encountered delays in recruitment because of the impact of the pandemic and the use of Tullyallen for COP26, combined with some pension changes that were introduced at relatively short notice, resulting in an increased retirals, means collectively that we do have fewer officers presently operating in Police Scotland than would otherwise be the case. To prevent further reductions, of course, we're recruiting. At the end of July, I welcomed 300 new probationary constables into Police Scotland, and I would encourage anyone interested in our hugely rewarding vacation, where you can make a positive difference to people's lives, to your fellow citizens' lives, to find out more about joining the police service, joining your police service. Anyone can be a police officer. What is required is a commitment to hard work and a commitment to public service. But to safeguard an effective policing response, as we manage our officer establishment, I have directed that priority is given to support three critical areas: our local policing response capability, our Contact Command and Control Division, C3, and our work in public protection. In doing this, we seek to ensure areas which encounter the greatest demand and which carry the greatest risk in keeping people safe are prioritised for resources. Now, as has been demonstrated over the last number of years during the pandemic, and in fact during COP26 as well, we in Police Scotland are able to take quick action in the short term to maintain effective service for our citizens when demand is high and resources limited. One example of our ability to continue to provide effective service was illustrated on Monday. There was some data published around 999 answering times across the United Kingdom. And from that data, it was clear that Police Scotland and our colleagues in C3 continue to perform very well, particularly when compared with large police services across the UK. And I know that members, some members had the opportunity to visit officers and staff at our area control room and service centre in Govan last week. I was very grateful for that level of interest and support that members provided. And I'd also like to thank our C3 teams for their commitment and their hard work in this essential policing function, which is absolutely vital to keep people safe. We know that policing is so often the service of first resort and the service of last resort. And we continue to see an increase in community needs, such as mental health crises and social care, where, in my view, a police response is provided in the absence of other services. We are working very closely with partner agencies and will continue to do so over the coming weeks to highlight these issues, primarily to ensure that people are given the right help at the right time, the help that they require and the help that they deserve. As Chief Constable, it is, of course, my duty to be candid with the authority and through the authority with the public that we serve. And I need to say that we are seeing the impact in our service of having fewer officers across a range of operational areas, including our responsiveness to calls from the public. As detailed in the one of the reports later in today's agenda, in the finance report, our forecast for the year suggests that we will run at an average of over 450 officers below our budgeted establishment of 17,234. Now, the underspend on officer pay has in fact been offset by a significant increase in overtime and some of the inflationary pressures that you mentioned, Chair, in your introductory remarks. We are, of course, keeping a close review of the sustainability of high levels of overtime, not only to ensure that we maintain a balanced budget, but vitally to ensure the safeguard and well-being of our officers and staff and their families. We cannot continue to use overtime and place that burden on the officers and staff of Police Scotland. I am hugely grateful and very impressed every day for the dedication and the goodwill of our officers and staff who continue to step forward under extremely demanding times to maintain the effective public service that we provide. Now, the award of a 5% increase in pay and allowances for officers that was agreed earlier this month was important recognition of the work that officers do and reward for them and their families at a time when, like everyone, they are concerned about the cost of living crisis. I am hopeful, Chair, as no doubt you and members are, that we are able to make progress in relation to our police staff colleagues and hopefully find a pay award resolution in the days and weeks ahead. Chair, in your introductory remarks, you mentioned the Scottish Government's resource spending review, and I would like to make some further comment in that regard as well. We know that if the spending review plans for flat cash allocations for policing are carried through and implemented into a budget for next year and beyond, policing will not be able to regain and retain that budgeted establishment of 17,234 officers, as well as making provision for further pay awards. Now, of course, officer and staff pay is the single biggest revenue spend by policing in Scotland, around £1.1 billion. Every 1% increase to pay represents roughly £11 million of additional cost pressure. Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, and again I'm delighted to see Mr Naylor with us this morning, has recommended that the Scottish Government, the authority and Police Scotland should cease to use that number of 17,234 as a target. Chair, in fact, such an outcome may simply be financial reality. And again, as you outlined in your introductory comments, Chair, I think it's important to stress the significant progress that's been made in policing in Scotland over recent years following the challenging and at times painful process of reform. Policing in Scotland, unlike many other sectors, has undergone the reset asked of the public sector. £200 million a year, £200 million of annual cost to the public purse that's been removed compared to legacy arrangements. We have made the reform, we've taken the hard decisions, and we are on track collectively to make £2 billion worth of savings by 2026, savings that have been required through our funding allocation, and yet at the same time the service has been able to reform and improve the services provided. We know, of course, that the cost of living crisis has the potential, as you alluded to, Chair, to increase the vulnerability of people, while at the same time placing pressures on the services which exist to support them. The implications of the cost of living crisis places additional strain right across society, and such strain, such pressures have the potential to lead to social disharmony and some level of protest, as we have discussed already. Chair, we in Policing in Scotland, the Scottish Police Authority, Police Scotland, have worked together, have worked very hard over the last 9 to 10 years within the service and beyond policing to enhance our service, to re-energise localism, to establish credible plans for investment, to further improve effectiveness and efficiency, and to build rigour and public assurance to deliver a balanced budget. I would concur with your own comments, Chair. Now is the time to build on that progress, that reset that policing in Scotland has undertaken, not to risk losing ground. And we would do that if policing is not adequately funded. Change and improvements are still vitally required. In this regard, you'll see in my written report that I describe a national change event that was held at our headquarters at Tullyallen earlier in the summer. And the event itself outlined the improvements we wish to drive across our fleet, our states, our technology, as well as our working practices and how we deliver services, so we can improve policing for the public that we serve. What we are proposing, a unified contact platform for the public by way of example, an ability to enable services for officers to book leave, to order necessary kit and equipment, our ability to hire new officers and staff, to provide body-worn video, to make sure that we have buildings and vehicles that are fit for purpose. In my view, these are basic core requirements, and in many instances have already been introduced by other services and sectors. Building our cyber capability, constantly reviewing how we support local communities to ensure public protection are imperatives to maintain our operational competence, I beg your pardon, as well as the confidence of the public that we serve. Sustained investment is required to ensure Police Scotland has the capacity and capability to continue to provide effective policing for all our citizens, to ensure the social cohesion that you talk about, Chair, and to protect the safety, the security, the well-being of our communities and the people of Scotland. As has been demonstrated throughout the pandemic, as has been demonstrated during COP26, Scotland needs, deserves and values an effective and responsive police service which is appropriately funded. The challenges of today and tomorrow serve to underline that ongoing requirement. In closing, Chair, I'd like to just reflect, as this morning, I think as I've done regularly, that the people within the Police Service of Scotland are key to the success of policing. My written report details a virtual promotion parade as well as a virtual long service and good conduct event that we held in July. But again, I was absolutely delighted this week, Chair, and again delighted that you were able to join with me a physical long service and good conduct award, where we were able to personally thank and congratulate over 40 recipients, police officers and police staff, members of Police Scotland, members of the Scottish Police Authority, for the lengthy contribution that they have made to the public service. And again, I was extremely grateful, Chair, that you were able to join us for that moment of gratitude and thanks, and that you were able to address the officers and staff and their families as I was. Chair, I've spoken at some length this morning because I felt there was some significant issues I wish to bring to the Police Authority and to discuss in the public domain. But I'll close there. But as always, very happy to take questions and observations along with my deputies. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sir Ian. Can I start with questions? And I'm going to start with Tom Halpin and then get to Katrina. So Tom Halpin and Katrina.
Thank you, Chair, and Chief Constable, for your report. You referred to the disgraceful behaviour that was witnessed recently in Perth, and bear in mind the environment we're going to have to police, particularly the next 18 months. We have described an expectation of a number of larger gatherings and protests, and for that to increase. And I'm also recognising that there's you've indicated there's a live investigation, so I'm not asking for specifics on that operation. But building on the learning from a rights-based approach to policing in the pandemic, and we saw it in COP26 as well, very successfully, I'd ask for clarification in terms of policing protest. Are there circumstances now where a clear line has been crossed in terms of the law that you would expect police on the ground to intervene at the time? Because we're talking about retrospective investigations and with people who are clearly would be victims of criminal behaviour who are there at the time. So in terms of maintaining public confidence, what are the circumstances you would intervene at the time?
Thanks for that, Tom. And yeah, I mean, that's why I spent a fair bit of time in my comments this morning just addressing those issues. And I think just by way of further amplification, we do have a rights-based approach to policing in Scotland, and it served us well. But it's clear, and if it needs underlined, I take this opportunity to do so this morning, that with rights comes responsibilities. And people also have the right to be politically active without being abused, without being threatened, without being subject to intimidation. Now, I am, and would never sit here after the event and judge some operational decisions that are taken on the ground. As you know, and as colleagues know, each set of circumstances and each incident and event needs to be determined. The first thing you would never wish to escalate any level of disorder or concern. But it's very, very clear, and that's why, again, I wanted to underline that the approach of Police Scotland is to do with the rule of law and to do with public safety. Don't judge us or don't judge our approach through whichever constitutional lens you may hold or whatever political view you may hold. We as a service are there to ensure public safety, and we as a service are there to ensure that people can exercise their legitimate right to be politically active without intimidation and certainly without any level of physical violence. So those judgments go to the heart of the discretion at the Office of Constable. We saw that through the pandemic. We saw how we dealt with significant protests during COP26. And as we go into what could be a difficult period, I would just wish to reiterate, I think, the consensus that all political leaders have said in Scotland and across the United Kingdom, that level of intimidation and that level of behaviour is wholly unacceptable. That is not legitimate protest. Protest, by its nature, can be disruptive. We know that. We know what the law says. We know that has to be facilitated at times, but not at the cost of public safety and not at the cost of other people's rights to exercise their democratic rights as well. It is going to be a difficult time, and I would just wish that people continue to speak and act with a level of moderation and respect for those who hold contrary views. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm going to come to Katrina Stewart, then Fiona McQueen. Katrina.
Morning, Chief Constable. Can I just say, first of all, I was one of the people that attended the C3 Centre in Govan last week. It was absolutely fascinating, very impressive and very much appreciated, so thanks for that. I'd like to focus on your item on leadership, promotion and recognition. And I'd like to draw attention to the annual police plan outcome 4 and the item in there around equality, diversity and inclusion. And I know this work is being overseen and supported by Fiona McQueen and the People Committee, on which I sat until this summer. So I'm very well aware there's a great deal of commitment to and a lot of work being done in this area. But the figures currently are still frustratingly uneven and to some extent even quite shockingly so, especially in terms of police officers ranking sergeant and above. And I'd just like to draw your attention to one or two figures from the biannual EDI report to the People Committee at the end of last year. So in terms of gender, we still only have 27% female against 73% male. 82% are still white Scottish, with only 1% registered BME, 83% heterosexual, and 3% are registered as disabled, with a further 10% choosing not to disclose. And the HMICS have specifically noted previously the issues around the so-called hidden disabilities, for example, autism, dyslexia, and ADHD, and fear of disclosure, for these people. So my question is, what I'd really like to ask is, can you speak to how the leadership work that you've highlighted in your report is going to include the kind of positive action recommended by the HMICS that would help underpin and even accelerate your equalities, diversity and inclusion strategy? Thank you.
Thanks, Katrina. And I mean, I think you're right to highlight some of the challenges that we as a police service have about making sure our organisation is as diverse as the public that we serve is truly representative. I think all public services have that challenge, but I think we as a police service, because of the unique role that we have, I think we have a particular duty to ensure that we are fully representative, to ensure that our operating environment is one that is safe for everyone and everyone can truly be themselves, because that's the value of the police service, that we reflect the diversity and we reflect the deep qualities and strength that lies within Scotland as a country. The work that we are doing, I feel, in our approach to equality, diversity and inclusion, I think is utterly committed. DCC Fiona Taylor is leading in that area. You know as well as I do, Katrina, that in terms of getting sustained change, getting people through at senior level, this is generational change that we are embarked upon. This is not an 18-month project, it's not a 5-year project, this is a sustained approach to ensuring that Police Scotland is fully represented and people are given every opportunity for advancement, for development, for lateral development. Not everybody wishes to be promoted. I mean, one of the issues, and I am concerned, and it's been raised about a significant spike in retirals that's been caused by some of these changes, completely out with our control, to the pension arrangements for a certain cohort of officers. There will be a loss of experience and there will be a loss of knowledge, but that also is an opportunity to allow maybe younger officers and staff to come through, and we're certainly looking at that with that focus of diversity attached to it as well. But I wonder if DCC Taylor might add some specifics to my comments as well, if that's okay, Chair.
Thanks, Chief. Thanks, Katrina. Really pertinent question, particularly now. And you're just reflecting on the Chief's comments this morning. It's more important now than ever that we develop our people, and that's from the youngest, the newest probationer right the way through to the most senior levels in our organisation. And the kind of golden thread for me, to use that cliche, around how we manage that ongoing development of all of our people has to be focused on their and our understanding, collective understanding of equality, diversity and inclusion. Because if we actually understand what being a truly inclusive organisation means at every level within Police Scotland, then that, I think, is how we address many of the issues that you have quite rightly identified this morning. There is a kind of a saying that's a kind of common parlance at the moment. If you can see it, you can be it. So, again, starting right at the foundation of our organisation, we're really fortunate now. We've got some incredible BME officers who've stepped forward to take on roles as probationary training instructors. So we have those overt role models for our most, for our newest people into the organisation to look at what, in the rank of constable you can achieve. And of course, what I want to do with what I want us to do collectively, but where I think it's, I am sort of genuinely committed and feel this is one of the most important elements of my responsibilities within policing in Scotland, is to ensure that those development programmes, which we are overhauling at the moment, we are renewing, we're refreshing our first and second line managers programmes, the programme that we're about to roll out later on this year for our sergeants, inspectors and chief inspectors, a programme which will touch 5,500 people in our organisation, is around how we lead inclusively. And that is about encouraging our people, supporting our people to have those conversations with their colleagues, to understand the issues that they are encountering, that they are dealing with, to encourage them to come forward if there are difficult conversations to be made, to help them understand, to your point, hidden disabilities and how we deal properly, how we ensure that those reasonable adjustments are there so that everybody can actually have a fulfilling sort of career within Police Scotland. Now, the Chief has said this before, and I will reiterate it. Perhaps we did not spend enough time, effort, money and thought in the early days of Police Scotland in training and developing our first, second and third line managers and our leaders. That's what we intend to do now. So again, we can overtly demonstrate that commitment. And as I say, a number of the sort of subordinate leadership sort of programmes, we are reviewing and refreshing to ensure that there is genuine access, sort of equal opportunity of access, that those with caring responsibilities are not, for example, disinhibited or inhibited from taking up that initial sergeant's programme. So there is a plethora of work going on across the organisation to identify our talent, to nurture, to support our talent, to accelerate it. We now have an accelerated leadership programme, you'll be aware, that we didn't have before. So again, to the Chief's point about how we bring people through and how we start actually to have a more sort of accurate reflection of the demographics of our organisation at every level within that organisation. It's not single strand, as the Chief said. It's not something that we're going to accomplish or come to any kind of accommodation about overnight. But it's something that we are fundamentally, as a leadership team, absolutely committed to.
Thank you very much. I'm going to have to move on, Katrina, because we've got a large number of questions. If we have time, I'll come back to you. I've got Fiona McQueen and then Michelle Miller on the screen. So, Fiona McQueen.
Thanks, Chair. Chief, good morning. I've got a couple of questions. One, it may be too early. I'm interested. There was a lot of learning on COP26, particularly around the welfare of officers, and you had officers down with West Midlands for the Commonwealth Games, and I don't know if it's too early to say, have they come back and reported some of the changes that you put in place in terms of welfare of policing such a large event, whether they were translated down and how your officers were treated. The other question, if I may run them together, is that it'll cost you. I'm really pleased to see this in terms of the harm that alcohol causes young people, but also society as wider. I'd be interested a bit more and to understand the it'll cost you. So I'd be confident that there was less alcohol purchased, and so we've got reduction in antisocial behaviour, a reduction of street drinking from young people. So I'd be interested in a bit more detail about how successful that was, and obviously delighted that it's been rolled out.
Thank you, Fiona. I'll maybe ask DCC Care to say a little bit more about it'll cost you, although I'd like to say just a couple of comments. In regard to the learning from these events, you're absolutely right that we are part of the wider UK policing structure. COP26 was extraordinary in its scale, but the focus that we had right at the outset, and pay tribute to DCC Care's leadership, pay tribute to now retired ACC Bernie Higgins as the goal commander for the event. There was always a focus on officer welfare and well-being, particularly people who were travelling large areas, because some of the events that have taken place, that crucial area round about logistics and officer and staff welfare and care was missed. And actually, not only is it wrong morally, it can actually have an impact then on the effectiveness of the operation. So I think a lot of those learning points were taken on board. We certainly had a significant detail in Birmingham to support the Commonwealth Games. You're right, though, we haven't done the full debrief as yet. We'll pick that up. But I do think as a focus, it's something that I would say probably over the last sort of 5 years or so, that officer welfare and officer and staff welfare and well-being is given real prominence. It almost features in a lot of the operational decisions. As I said, not only because of that moral duty to look after officers and staff, but actually it makes your operation better as well. And in terms of it'll cost you, what I think like about this initiative, amongst other things, and again, we'll continue to evaluate it, but it does illustrate this broader role of policing that I've was very strong during the pandemic around that role, that we are a police service. Law enforcement is part of our responsibility, but actually prevention, protection, social cohesion, those are also part of the police role and function. And certainly the It'll Cost You initiative is about that protection and prevention. That's the sort of philosophy that lies behind it. I wonder, Will, would you be able to add some specifics to that?
Thank you, Chief, and thanks for the question, Fiona. I mean, the It'll Cost You campaign ran from the 16th of May up until the 14th of August. We'll have the full evaluation ready by the end of September, and we'd be delighted to bring it back and have that discussion with the board. I mean, its aim was very simple, as the Chief has said. It was about making people aware of their responsibilities and duties, particularly when it came to accessing alcohol for vulnerable children, and to make them aware that, you know, it's a significant fine, up to £5,000 or 3 months in prison if you buy alcohol for a minor. Some of the early indications we're getting, subject to the formal final review at the end of September, are we did detect people who were buying alcohol for minors right across the country, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen. We involved the PSYV, the Police Scotland Youth Volunteers, in a targeted campaign around Transmit, where we thought young people may be more vulnerable. It worked very well. And we did, anecdotally at this stage, subject to the final review, see a reduction in antisocial behaviour incidents. But actually our principal and primary concern was about the protection and welfare of young people, and we've certainly seen some significant benefits out of that. We'd hoped to have run the campaign sooner, but the pandemic, as it did with many other things, just got in the way, and we will run it again. And once we get the final review, we'll come back down and have a more detailed discussion with you.
Thank you very much. Now, I've got 7 members who would like still to speak, so I'm going to go to Michelle Miller and then Paul Eadie. And can I just ask again, all of you slightly raise your voices so we can hear at the back of the room here. There's quite poor acoustics in here. So thank you very much. So I've got Michelle Miller and then Paul Eadie.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief Constable, for your report. A couple of observations, really, rather than questions, if I may. And the first one relates to the section on public protection and the significant convictions. And I just really welcomed in the last paragraph there the fact that you secured convictions in relation to offences that were really happened a very long time ago. And I think that it's a really important message for people to see that the passage of time has no bearing on the focus and the effort that Police Scotland will go to in terms of investigating those crimes, because I do think it is really important to encourage people to come forward. So I particularly welcome that. The other was that your reference, I think in a different section, to the That Guy campaign, and not specifically to that, but actually what I really welcome is the fact that you're not just saying, well, we've been there, we've done that, it worked well and wasn't that good, but that actually what you're doing is looking at, and what next? So I particularly welcome that kind of ongoing focus on how that campaign might develop into a new campaign or whatever direction it goes in, and would be really, really interested in seeing how that progresses. So I particularly welcome that. I do have a question that relates under your section on the National Change event to the local policing review, but I know that there is an item specifically on that. So if I may, I'll just keep my question for then. So that was it. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, Michelle. Paul Eadie.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask about the item in your report regarding local authority engagement? I'd just like a little bit more colour on that, and I'm interested to hear, you know, in light of the fact that this would have been the first meeting post local council elections, are the issues raised by COSLA and Solace, are they any even subtly different from the ones that were raised by the previous leadership team in local government? So that's my first question.
Paul, thank you for that. I will ask Deputy Chief Constable Kerr to respond to that. I think, but by way of introduction, what I would say is that Will's work as the leader in terms of local policing has really made a significant turnaround in our relationship with local government, local authorities, elected members, with SOLAS and with COSLA. It was another area where you may recall, Paul, that the relationships were in the early years of Police Scotland were strained, I think is probably an accurate description, whereas I think the level of engagement and challenge that exists now has really been a significant turnaround. And again, just taking you at your question, I think the dish will maybe add some colour to that.
Chief, yeah. The short answer to your question, Paul, is yes, there has been some subtle changes to the issues we've been talking about. Some of the substantive issues remain the same, issues that concern local communities around antisocial behaviour, visibility of local officers, the identity and relationship that they have with local community teams have remained exactly the same and will do over the next few years. But to give you a practical worked example of some of those changes, we held the last of the bi-monthly meetings with between Police Scotland, COSLA and Solace only on Monday past. A few days ago, it's co-chaired by the current chair of Solace, happens to be Andrew Kerr from Edinburgh, and myself, and we picked one strategic and one tactical issue for every one of those meetings. A strategic issue was around the National Care Service. As you can imagine, that was detailed, at times relatively heated discussion. But the other issue we talked about was principally around the cost of living crisis and about local authorities stepping once again as our key delivery partner into the space, creating warm spaces using leisure and other council facilities, and our responsibility to step in and be visible in those spaces too, because they would be vulnerability hubs as well as being provided services for vulnerable members of the community over the course of this winter and probably for the next 18 months. So there has been a subtle change to the types of areas that we're interested in talking to them about. The other area, and I'll just very briefly touch on this, has been around the RSR starting to get us to think again in a slightly more accelerated way about shared services and shared assets. So that conversation is now starting to come to the fore again. And it's not just a conversation with local authorities. The work we've been doing with Public Health Scotland, as I was mentioning briefly at the beginning, is now extending out to include NHS NES, which you and Fiona will know far more about than I do in terms of the NHS Education Scotland and the services and specialist advice that they can give us around neurodiversities, around learning disabilities, and specifically what we've asked Karen Reid to do is to help support us in terms of the knowledge, awareness and skills of local officers to do de-escalation and communication skills around dementia with an ageing population. There's a vast amount of practical benefit that we get out of these structural relationships, but I could talk forever on that, but I'll stop at that point in the interest of time.
Thanks very much for that. My second question is kind of the different side, the other side of the same coin. Were there any hard messages that you gave to our local government partners, and I think particularly in light of the funding issues that the Chief Constable has raised at the beginning of the meeting?
Yes, we are starting to have some more difficult conversations now by necessity. As the Chief talked about earlier on, our demand curve, Paul, as you know, and will have experienced when you went into our C3 contact centres, you know, the 3.5 million calls we get in every year, only 20% of those calls end up being crimed. The other 80% of those calls are in significant part displaced and responsibility when members of the public who may be vulnerable, who may be undergoing a mental health crisis, simply can't get the service that they expect and need, particularly outside core hours. Now, the challenge for us, as the Chief was saying earlier on, our statutory remit is safety and well-being. We have a statutory responsibility, particularly when a citizen is in crisis. What we shouldn't be doing, though, because we're not professionally best qualified, and it saps our capacity to be visible in communities for the other 23 hours a day, is we shouldn't end up having to spend 10 hours in A&E every single weekend keeping people company because there isn't acute mental health services or some other more appropriate professional advice and support available for them. So those are the types of conversations we're now starting to have. It is a really difficult balance for us. How do you step back from that community protection and service that, in the absence of anybody else, that vulnerable citizen isn't going to get? And we're starting to lean into that conversation. We haven't actually declared what we're going to do in that space yet, because I think it is incredibly sensitive and we will never step away from a citizen in need. But that's exactly the space those conversations are going to get into over the next few years as a result of some of the indications in this particular RSR.
Thank you very much, Paul. I got Caroline Stewart and then Katerina Casper. Caroline?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief Constable, for your report. I'd like to add my congratulations to all the officers and staff on their promotion and long service awards. And it was when I was reading that section I noticed the Special Constable Long Service Award. And that maybe reflect, because we haven't talked about this for quite a while, I just wondered if you could tell us what the size of the current complement is in terms of the special constables. And given the challenges you've outlined very clear this morning in terms of officer numbers, but also budgets, I wondered, do you see the special constable role having a sort of wider sort of role in the workforce mix going forward? Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. I don't have the exact figure with me. I don't know if DCC Kerr can add a little bit more on that, but the shorter answer to your response is absolutely volunteering and, you know, police officers are citizens in uniform. It's captured by the role of the special constable. The officer, Michael, who worked in East Kilbride, who was with us at the long service event, lives in that community, has provided, you know, consistent service, and again is deeply respected by officers and the community itself. We have, as you know, when Police Scotland came into being, we did a refocus of the special constabulary. So the actual sort of numbers, in a way, it's the numbers may be consistent or may fluctuate, but the individuals who make up that number change, because it's now a clear pathway into the service. But there are others who wish to provide just that community service. So we are absolutely re-energising our special constabulary. I was at an event maybe sort of 4 to 6 weeks ago where, for the first time since the pandemic, we were able to bring the special constabulary to headquarters for a training weekend. And I was able to go out on that Saturday and meet them, thank them for their service. So there's a lot of effort going on to both to recruit into the regulars, if you like, as well as the special constabulary. But we definitely see a key role for them because it's part of that relationship. The exact number I don't actually have, Will. I don't know if you've got a better figure in your head.
Figure, Caroline, but they're just over 500 at the minute. The numbers have dropped quite a bit over the last couple of years, a result of a number of issues, not least some funding challenges, but also the fact that it's a great career entry point into the regular service. As the Chief said, we've got a bit smarter over the last couple of years in how we train our special constables as well. We don't just do training in the central belt now. If you work in a rural or an island community, our learning and development function have been quite innovative about how we spread those training programs out right across the country to encourage and incentivise people to join. But it's a great asset. We'd love to have more of them. Active citizenship is a tremendous boon for policing, but it's not without some cost as well.
Thank you very much. I've got Katerina Casper, followed by Grant McRae. Katerina.
Thank you, Chief Constable, for your report. I have got a question around police officer recruitment. So I think we all know that at the moment unemployment rates are quite low. It is, quite frankly, quite a competitive, tough labour market just now across public, private and the third sector as well. So I have noticed the recruitment campaign all over social media. I think looks very good. But I would like to ask, so how high are your confidence levels that you will be able to recruit the number of police officers that you're looking to recruit, not necessarily just in terms of general sort of entry level, but also specialist skill sets? And how will you know if the police, if the campaign is actually doing its job? And do you have any sort of room for course correction? Basically, is there anything that you might be doing differently?
Thanks, Katerina. Your observations about the labour market, if you like, are very valid. And over the years, you can see sort of fluctuations, and I'm talking over decades in police recruitment. At times where there can be a surge into policing for a whole series of reasons, and then at other times, it can be localised as well. At a time when the oil industry was booming in the northeast, there was real difficulties trying to recruit in that area. The sector can change, and then it becomes different, and policing becomes more attractive to some than it had been. We will evaluate our campaign, so we want to see, well, does that increase the number of people showing interest, of applicants? I suppose the one point I would wish to make, and just be very, very clear on, that there are still significant amount of people who are stepping forward and wishing to join policing, both as police officers and police staff. And there is a distinction between recruitment and selection. So our recruitment campaign is to try and get that net as broad and as wide and as deep as it can be, and to encourage people who maybe hadn't thought about policing to look at it. I fundamentally say to anyone, if you've got that commitment, look at policing. You don't need a university degree, your qualification, you may have one, and that's fantastic, but actually it's the diversity. What you want, I want to people to come into service are people who've got a commitment to public service and people who are prepared to work hard. And that's what makes policing as diverse, because it has people of such mixed backgrounds. So we want to make that our recruitment net as wide as it can be, but our selection standards in terms of vetting, in terms of entry and values will remain extremely high. But we will evaluate it, and again, I'll report back on that at the board, because we'd be interested to see, does it increase the net, and also does it give us more diverse applicants as well, which is another objective of what we're seeking to do.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. I've got Grant McRae, followed by Jane Ryder.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief Constable, for your report. I just want to comment on one item in it in relation to the operational events on the Open Championship. As one of the volunteer marshals at that event, I very much welcomed the presence of officers and would praise the helpful way in which they engaged with spectators throughout the week. I thought it worked extremely well, and I would praise the organisation behind the planning and delivery of that event. Much appreciated, and I'm sure it's just one of many similar events that take place throughout the year where it doesn't attract a lot of publicity, but it's very positive. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. I'll pass that on. And you're right, it's one of those, it was a massive global event, massive worldwide audience, and had there been a security compromise, undoubtedly policing would have been at the forefront then. The fact it never happened is testament to the good work that was done. And it is close partnership working. Coming back to Caroline's question, the volunteering that you carried out and others, and our ability to work with volunteers and work with the community. So I'm grateful for your comments, and I'll pass them on to the officers involved. Thank you.
Jane Ryder.
Chief Constable, something that isn't specifically mentioned in your report, but since the last board meeting, there has been the publication of the new community justice strategy. And of course, the police are one of the key delivery partners. The strategy was published with an expectation of a delivery plan later in 2022, which only gives us actually another 4 months. So I just wondered if you could comment on current thinking and engagement as to the implications of the strategy, and I think particularly given the challenges you've been outlining and the priorities that you have set for the police. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Again, I'll ask DCC Kerr to add some detail to that. I think my observation on anything that looks to take activity, if you like, across the whole system, our role so often is that we are often the point of entry. So whether you wish to call it a funnel or whatever analogy you wish to use, we are often the first point of contact, whether it's for vulnerability, whether it's for offending, whether it is for victims of crime, or whether it's for people who need some level of diversion or assistance. So the reason I make that general point is that our relationships with criminal justice and community justice partners is absolutely central, both at a national level and at a local level. And none of these national strategies can really be implemented in full without our full and active engagement and involvement. And again, strategically and in terms of actual core values, we are absolutely committed to that partnership working. That is a fundamental of our approach, certainly in recent years, that working with partners with mutual respect and collectively is really, really important. We can't step back from working across the sectors because we've got such an important role to play. But Will, I don't know if you can add.
Jane, yeah, you'll be aware of this, but the strategic backdrop to the document referred to was a vision for Scotland. The document that was published in February this year, it outlines the Scottish Government's plans for a safe, just and resilient Scotland, and the 3 objectives that are listed in that report are actually quite important for the National Justice or Criminal Justice Strategy. So they are, as a reminder, women and children in justice, Secondly, hearing victims' voices, and thirdly, shifting the balance from custody to community-focused outcomes. Now, bearing in mind the size of the backlog in our justice system at the moment, the third one is particularly apposite. So the National Strategy for Criminal Justice actually is looking at those two measures, direct measures and diversion from prosecution in both the Police Service and the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service. It is very timely, as the Chief has said, because of the cost of living crisis. We are naturally always looking and calibrating how we apply Lord Advocate's guidelines for lower end offences to make sure that we don't unnecessarily or disproportionately and punitively disadvantage those who are already having challenges as a result of the cost of living crisis. We can issue recorded police warnings for a variety of offences, but we are reasonably limited when it comes to fixed penalty notices. We can only issue for a short list of offences, unlike our colleagues in England and Wales, and we're currently having discussions with the Scottish Government about extending that list to which fixed penalty notices can apply to include low-end abusive and threatening behaviour offences. If I try and get the piece of statute, the name of the piece of statute right, the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act 2022 that was enacted for England and Wales earlier this year gives a far broader range of offences for which policing can actually apply those direct measures. And what that act did in the South was actually to rationalise the structures from 6 different ranges of direct measures down to 2, a diversion and a community caution. So it's never been more timely to review how and when we do direct measures to try and keep people out of a court system that's already struggling in terms of capacity, and we welcome those continued discussions with the Scottish Government.
That might be directly relevant to one of our next speakers, because I see that HMICS has already suggested that as one of its scrutiny in relation to what I understand the previous criminal justice strategy, and that aim for diversion and intervention at the earliest possible stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alistair Hay, followed by Mary Pitt-Casely. Alistair.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief Constable, for your report. As always, it gives us extremely valuable insights into the range, the diversity, the complexity of the tasks that are undertaken by Police Scotland. What I want to focus on is the 3 priorities that you set out. We've already had very clearly articulated and explained to us today the resourcing challenges that are with us and the potential ones in the future. So you've determined through your operational independence, and part of our role is to help provide that strong and a high level of accountability. So could you explain some of the rationale behind the 3 priorities that you set out today, given the resourcing challenges as they stand at the moment?
Thank you, Alistair. Thank you for your introductory comments. In essence, this is where I feel there's a greatest threat, risk and harm potential to our communities. That's the fundamentals. Now, while I've asked my deputies and the senior leadership team and divisional commanders to give priority to those 3 areas, we as an organisation are not going to stop changing our organisation. We're not going to stop taking forward some of the key elements of reform, our core operating solutions. We've just rolled out a single crime system for most of the north of Scotland now. We're now moving into the Central Belt. As colleagues will know, that's been a holy grail of policing in more than the 30 years I've served, and we're on the verge of achieving that. We're going to have a single crime recording system for the whole of Scotland, and that allows data interrogation, it allows patterns, it allows vulnerability, it will give us great assistance. So these other areas are continuing, but those 3 areas that I have prioritised round about response in terms of communities, in terms of public protection, and ensuring that our C3 is fully resourced and fully responsive, are there because of the need to protect our citizens and also to retain the confidence of the communities that we serve. Those are the 3 areas I want to give priority to. But there is a level of complexity. It doesn't mean that we're not doing anything else, as you might imagine. It's actually just where there are competing challenges. That's the lens that I've asked the deputies and the rest of the leadership team to look at some of the resource demands through.
much, Chair. Yes, thank you, Chief Constable, for your report. I noted that there was a fairly significant multi-agency exercise to test the collective response to a major incident. And I was very interested in that and look forward to receiving some more information about that once you've had an opportunity for a proper debrief, which of course far too early to have done that. I was thinking about the number of people in all of those agencies that are listed in your report who have experience and expertise in relation to multi-agency incidents and major incidents, many of whom will have retired or moved on or been promoted or whatever, and replaced by people who are relatively inexperienced and relatively new to this area. And so I was concerned to know whether or not at this point in time, based on the initial feedback from this exercise, you are content that the relationships are still good and that the response that was obvious from the exercise is still reassuring. And if, I'm hoping the answer is yes, but if not, you know, what would be the next steps to take in this? Because it does take people a while to get into harness in these areas, which are quite specialised in some ways and which require expertise and experience to be able to fulfil the duties that are on all of the agencies, not just Police Scotland. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. And you're absolutely right. That need for organisational memory and relationships that are built up over decades is crucial and critical, and that's in part why this exercise was established. But of course, in some ways, a lot of the training that's available now and some of the mindset about training and exercising and actually developing collectively with partners is actually very different. Even when I started in the police service, we tended to train alone, and then at some stage we might be brave enough to go and speak to somebody from local government or the fire service. But that was pushing the boundaries, where actually a lot of younger officers and staff just know that integrated partnership working is how they deliver business. It's what they do every day. So we will do a debrief on that, and it's that cycle, just maintaining the level of knowledge. As I said earlier, when people leave, they will take experience and knowledge, but it also creates opportunities for others to come in and to work collectively. So I do have a level of confidence. Our exercising programme is quite focused. It is a multi-agency exercising team. It's actually based at the fire service headquarters in Cambuslang, populated by people who have a policing background but have a background in other disciplines as well. So in our overall approach to responding to major incidents is absolutely founded on partnership working. So I have that level of confidence, but we will get a specific debrief on this. Thank you.
A final question from Tom Halpin.
Thank you. Chief Constable, I'm sure you agree our commitment to our workforce and communities is reinforced and sometimes exposed through the investments that we make. We saw some recent negative reporting regarding the availability of electrical vehicle charging points. We made a very significant investment in greening our fleet in electrical vehicles. Are we satisfied that the mix of investment between charging points and the actual vehicles is right, or has it exposed a shortcoming?
I don't think it has. I think there was, we are at the forefront of not only policing in the UK but the public sector and trying to green our fleet. But we've never said that we are going to be wholly self-sufficient in this regard. The nature of it is that we want to work with partnerships. So it might be that there are local authorities that have charging points, that there are other agencies, and we'd look to use our vehicles in that regard. None of the vehicles we've rolled out, and I'll ask the DCO to add something to this, and correct me if some of my assertions are inaccurate, but none of the vehicles that we've rolled out thus far are operational vehicles as such. So it's not marked, if you like, response cars. It's cars that are used in support functions that are required in that regard. We are absolutely committed to greening our fleet. The infrastructure that exists is inadequate at the moment, but that's not an issue that solely lies with policing. We're trying to work in that kind of that partnership mode. And some of the vehicles that are located at parts of our estate where there isn't that infrastructure, well, we knew that when we deployed them there because we wanted to use the infrastructure of other partners. It's that wider approach that we're trying to take. But David, I know you could maybe add a little bit more to that.
Thanks, Chief. Thanks, Tom, for the question. We're not slowing down in terms of our rollout. The thing that's inhibiting us is grid capacity, to be quite frank, which isn't our infrastructure problem. What we are doing is working with the government, working with power suppliers. The incident you're referring to was where effectively these are non-response cars where we don't have charging infrastructure in place at the station, but there is local other public sector bodies where we can use it, and we obviously don't give guidance to people to kind of run cables out of a window. So we've reinforced that guidance, and we are catching up with it. The rollout's been really successful. The feedback we've had from officers and staff who use the vehicles is extremely positive. We're already seeing the benefits in the sense of financially, my fleet expenses are down by $1 million from last year to this year. And that's money, obviously, that I can reinvest into things like overtime and meeting some of the inflationary pressures. So we continue to push ahead as fast as we can. And to be honest, as the Chief has said, at 20% of the fleet, it's helping us bring down the overall age of the fleet. And again, that's a very positive experience for our officers and staff. I mean, the board will be very aware of, a good number of years ago, the amount of flack we were getting for, duct tape holding bits and pieces of cars together because we didn't have the money. The additional money we've got from Scottish Government in terms of the kind of green funds and things like that has helped us bring down the overall age of the fleet. So we'll continue to kind of roll out the investment as quick as we can, both in terms of grid capacity being available to us and also the right types of vehicles. So we're in a good place. And just remind people not to be silly and run a cable out of our window. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sir Ian and your team, for answering the board's questions on your report. Very welcome that. So I've just got two quick comments to make. One is a strategic one, which is the operational independence of the Chief Constable, which you mentioned in your presentation. Asserting that operational independence is a key role for the authority. I feel very strongly about that. Comment and indeed criticism is free, but direction is out of scope. And I think the accountability to which you hold yourself is the flip side, the corollary of the independence you have in operating policing. So the whole board is strongly behind asserting your operational independence, and the whole board, I hope, as you heard today, is also behind reaching in to ask you accountability issues. The second is a far more tactical question. I'm very grateful for DCC Fiona Taylor for keeping me fully informed on the Sky issue as it was unfolding. I'm very grateful for that engagement of the on-duty, most senior on-duty police officer. And as I said to her, and as you mentioned in your report, I'm very struck by the brave response of an unarmed officer in actually bringing that situation to a close and arresting somebody. And I won't say more than that because that will be under criminal investigation. So thank you very much indeed. Now, mea culpa, I missed out one of our most important committees in its committee's reports, which is our Resources Committee. Having talked about resources, you talked about resources. It was not deliberate, Grant. Before I bring in HMICS, I'd like Grant to update us on the Resources Committee.
And apologies for my late arrival. The points that I would raise from the Resources Committee meeting were really in relation to a review of the outcomes, a very successful outcome of the Aberdeen relocation project, which I think everybody found very innovative when it was first discussed. It's great to see a successful conclusion. Clearly there are lessons learned from it, which are now being taken forward for further relocation projects that are in the pipeline. The second thing I would particularly want to mention was the annual procurement report. Since the current head of procurement was appointed some time ago, he inherited quite a backlog of issues needing to be addressed, and it is really very positive to see how these have been progressively overcome, and how he and his team have a much larger grasp and grip over current and forthcoming procurement issues. It's very encouraging indeed, and we were pleased to hear these reports. Other items on the agenda were really in relation to monitoring the current financial positions and going beyond. into next year's budget, both of which feature later on the agenda. So I don't want to say anything more at this stage. Thank you.
Are there any questions to Grant from board members? We're going to move on now to Craig Naylor, Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary in Scotland, for his report. Welcome to your first board meeting. And if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit about your background as you're new in post, about your policing experience, and then present your report to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the board for this invite to discuss my annual report. I spent 30 years in policing across Lothian Borders Police, Police Scotland, and then latterly Lincolnshire Police, leaving there as Deputy Chief Constable before joining the National Crime Agency 3 years ago just now. In National Crime Agency, I had responsibility for investigations for the north of the UK, including Scotland, and the partnership we have with Police Scotland was quite exceptional in facilitating the fight against serious organised crime. I come into this to deliver a report on a period of inspection when I wasn't in post, which is slightly unnerving. The work done by Jill Emery, QPM, my predecessor, is basically what I will talk about. And I've got to pay tribute to her leadership of HMCIC during the past 4 years. I was delighted to be appointed in April this year and have, in reality, come into a very strong place. Much of the work we did prior to my arrival was to define a 3-year scrutiny plan. And the 3-year scrutiny plan is to do a number of things, obviously to scrutinise the activity of Police Scotland and to provide reports on how improvements can be made. But part of the 3-year planning is to give a bit more foresight to the service and to yourselves to allow an understanding of where we're going to look and what we're going to be expecting when we come and inspect. An awful lot of that focus and foundation is about self-assessment, basing it on the EFQM and giving an understanding to the service before we come in as to where they're strong and where they need to make some improvements. And we're already seeing benefits from that in the Strategic Workforce Plan report that we published earlier this year and the contact assessment model work that we will be publishing within the next 2 weeks. Having said that, we have set ourselves an ambitious 3-year plan. And with the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, we will review this in 3 or 4 weeks' time and just make sure we update you on our progress against the plan and what we will be doing over the next 6 months to the end of this first year. Chair, if you're happy, I want to make just 2 or 3 observations which I make at the start of my report, just to sort of draw a context on where we are and where we're going to be going forward. The response of the service to COVID-19 and to the Conference of Parties 26, I think, has been exceptional. The rights-based approach that was built in both by Sir Ian and his team, but also by the authority in appointing Lord Scott and an IAG, I think, has been very welcome. The learning from that in the round table chaired by DCC Kerr and yourself recently, I think, has brought a real scrutiny to how such a significant impact operation can be run effectively, and can keep the business as usual going in such challenging times. I suppose part of my role is about doing that scrutiny and understanding how things are done, how the money is spent and the best value. But also part of my role is to say well done when it's justified. And I'm very keen to do that, and you and I have had this conversation several times now, that we need to celebrate the success. And I would like to say publicly the work of the service around COP26, bringing such diverse forces, capabilities from all over the UK into Scotland to deliver on a challenging operational event, I think has been exceptional. And I know Tom Halpin has written to me this week about work we did on a previous assurance review, and I'll respond to you early part of next week, Tom. But I think we're in the same place, that the work that the service did, the work that the SPA did around assurance and how we have assured that as well, has shown a very good outcome. But there are challenges. There are challenges right across the United Kingdom. And one of the main things that we are concerned about is violence against women and girls. The issues that we all face around making sure that our workforce is representative, that it is respectful of the communities that we serve, while also focusing to make sure that those who are most vulnerable have a direct route into the service to make a notification of crimes or other incidents. Making sure the service that they get is effective and efficient and provides to their needs is key. And we're working just now on an inspection of domestic abuse and the service provided to victims. The voice of the victim in that is crucial, but it's often very hard to hear, whether that's face-to-face or through surveys, and we will continue to work on that. We're concerned at social media and the citizen journalist causing problems, and it's already been mentioned today about the protests in Perth, and the fact that people snip these into small bits that can seem to be at odds with what is in reality happening. And I do absolutely respect the operational independence of the Chief Constable on this, but I have a concern that this is becoming more and more challenging, more and more difficult to subsequently investigate. And then, how do we get those into court? And the management of the digital evidence is a challenge for every service across the UK and also for Police Scotland. But it also becomes a problem beyond the doors of Police Scotland when it goes into court, and how we get to a position where the Crown Office and Property Fiscal Service and Courts and Tribunal Service can manage that. We are seeing these small snippets of big incidents causing problems, and I'd be keen to understand how we can do that differently, how we can try and stop the polarising views in a different way. It's already been mentioned, Chair, about mental health. We will inspect on mental health later this year, and it's not just the mental health crisis that Police Service of Scotland faces, but it's the mental health of the officers and staff within the service that we will look at. So it's a two-pronged approach. We've had many conversations about the anecdotal reporting that mental health demand is growing. There's now data, and I pay tribute to Director Tom McMahon and his team on capturing and looking at that data differently to try and understand better where the demand is, what the challenges are. And I would agree with the Chief Constable that there is absolutely no argument about Police Scotland responding effectively to mental health challenges or other challenges in the community that are not criminal. It's absolutely the right thing to do. But there needs to be a service that picks up that demand when Police Scotland have responded and camped things down and safeguarded individuals. I was pleased to hear DCC Care's conversations with COSLA and Solace and others about how we can work more effectively around these areas, because I am concerned that this is soaking up significant resource, sitting in hospitals, sitting waiting for people to be treated when the best person to treat them is not a police officer. So there are things that we will look at in that space. We have talked about the resource spending review. I too am concerned at a flat cash settlement. This will impact on the affordability of the existing resource and of potential future developments, whether that's in resource areas or whether that's in capital. Not investing in capital causes problems. I've got to admit the conversation about fleet takes me back to my National Crime Agency days when we were struggling with the infrastructure to greenify our fleet, and Police Scotland is significantly ahead in that space. I think that's to be commended. I think that's a very strong position, but it's not an easy thing to do, and it's even more challenging with flat cash. Our strategic workforce plan inspection that we published earlier this year is hopefully going to help in looking at that move away from 17234 as a metric that has been in place for a long time. I think it's been a very good metric for the early part of it, from 2007 onwards. But I think there needs to be removing of the restriction on the Chief Constable and his team to allow them to spend the money that they get in the most appropriate way, whether that's 17,234 police officers, more or less, or with a different skill mix, skill set, warranted or unwarranted staff. And I think that work that needs to be done over the next year or two on that space will allow the service to be more flexible in the future. Demand has been talked about several times, and prioritisation has been mentioned by the Chief Constable. I understand in the crisis time that we're facing just now, with officer numbers reducing, the focus on local policing, C3 and public protection. I absolutely agree with his decision making. The way the force deals with the here and now, I think, is exceptional. The ability to respond in very short term is been seen in many, many situations, particularly COVID and COP26. There's strong evidence that mid-term planning, the sort of 18 months, is becoming stronger and more effective. And what we're keen to do is to look with the service, the senior team, about what does longer term planning and sort of scenario building look like. It is challenging though, and there are few forces in the UK or elsewhere that have got this right or have done this to any degree, to the same depth that the Strategic Workforce Plan was done 2 years ago. But I think it's a starting point rather than an end in itself. So I'm keen that when the service starts looking at this is based on not just the demand that's coming in, but the prioritisation and then consideration of what that budget envelope looks like in the future. So coming to conclusion, Chair, I would say that I've been away from policing in Scotland for just about 6 years. When I left, the environment was very different, and I would say that there is a significant stability in both the services senior team and the authorities senior team that I think has made a huge difference. It is a very different environment, and I think the scrutiny that is provided has improved things, but I also think the independence of the Chief Constable and his team has been well respected. So I would pay tribute to all of you on that, and it is great for me to see that when I come back in. There are still many improvements to be made though, and there are budget issues that will continue to challenge it, and I think it is right that they're called out at this forum. My role is to improve policing in Scotland. I can't do that on my own, so I do that very much with the service, with yourselves and with others, and I've got to pay tribute to all of the staff and officers that we come in touch with from both organisations, and the support we get, particularly during COVID, has been quite exceptional. My final point, though, Chair, is that I want to celebrate the success of policing in Scotland. I want to celebrate when things go well. So if I'm not doing that, please let me know. Please tell me when things are going well, because I've no doubt I will hear when things are not going well. So thank you very much, Chair, and I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you very much to the Chief Inspector of Police. I'm very grateful that you take time to come and speak to us so frankly about your approach and about your report. So I'm going to open it up now, if you wouldn't mind, to some questions, if that would be acceptable to you, from board members. Firstly, Fiona McQueen.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much. I thoroughly enjoyed your report and look forward in particular to see the joint inspection of custody services pulled together from a national perspective. There are two things that it would help me to better understand your thinking behind it. On page 18, you talk about 38.4% of responses not resulting in an incident or crime being reported, and therefore alternative solutions may be found. I'd be interested to understand what you mean by that, in terms of suggesting to me that you think maybe policing isn't appropriate, whereas I'm thinking of the wider role of policing in terms of clearly not everything is about a crime. And then similarly on the Group 5 crimes on page 20, a suggestion that would be where proactive effort is needed to report that. And again, I'd be interested to understand your workings about your assumptions there, and in particular, if you see solutions being necessary, or are both of these statistics a reflection on changing nature of crime and also changing nature of Police Scotland?
Two really interesting questions. The 38.4% not requiring an incident to be reported, we don't have enough information to tell exactly what they are. But it seems a large chunk of demand that's coming into policing requiring a call to be answered, I would suspect advice and guidance to be given by a call taker, and then nothing further to be happening. I'm very keen to understand how that could be diverted to online answers, different ways of reporting, but also to understand whether there is a demand for other organisations within that. As the Chief Constable said, the police service is the first and last port of call for the majority of society. And I suspect many of these calls are being diverted to other places or advice given. You know, the common thing in C3 division is people reporting dogs that have been lost, running about, etc., etc. How much demand is sitting in things like that that could be done much more efficiently and effectively by other organisations. In terms of Group 5 crimes, this is something that, again, I don't think there is an answer that I can give that says why, but I think I wanted to call out, and I did want to call out the fact that the Group 5 reduction is something that is causing me concern. Group 5 crimes tend to be those that are self-generated, so Misuse of Drugs Act, possession of offensive weapons, so things that are often done by police officers routinely based on intelligence or based on hotspot policing. I could give you a guesstimate at my thoughts on this. I suspect much of it is around how we dealt with during the pandemic, less people being visible on the streets. I suspect there is also that increasing demand and the call volume that is coming in through the Contact Command and Control Division, and having to respond to incidents of concern, so mental health, other things, violence, etc. So I don't think there is an answer yet, but it's certainly something that we've mentioned to Police Scotland, and I would hope that they would be able to start thinking about and not knee-jerk into, because this may be just evidence of where we are as a society at the moment and how much demand is coming into the front line. Thank you.
Much. I have Michelle Miller and then Tom Halpin.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Craig, for your report. Really interesting and really good to see a positive balance of challenge versus recognition of the work that is done. I think my question is similar to Fiona's, but it was just about clarification around the section about proactive policing. Are you saying that a potential reduction in proactive policing is causing an increase in demand in terms of the main crime groups? And so, or are you positing that that's a possibility? Because I suppose I'm interested in the relationship between the two, and I do wonder whether it might be something, perhaps not for here, but the Policing Performance Committee might look at just focusing on in a little bit more detail. But I don't want to go down that route if I'm misunderstanding what you're saying in your report.
Michelle, no, I wouldn't draw such a direct line between a reduction in one leading to an increase in the other. It is almost a fairly standalone, this is something to be looked at in terms of the reduction of proactivity. An increase in violent crime or sexual crime, I don't think you could draw one against the other. What I am concerned about, though, is the reduction and why has that occurred, and then allow the understanding of what happens next. I'm more than happy to discuss this further at the Performance Committee if that would be of value.
I think it would, and we can perhaps have a conversation offline about that and involve others in that, so that we're actually focusing in on the crux of the issue and making sure that we're getting that focus right. That would be really helpful.
Certainly. Thank you.
Michelle, Tom Halpin and Paul Eadie. Tom.
First of all, I'd really like to pay tribute to HMI staff for the contribution they made in the Strategic Oversight Group to COP26. The additional level of scrutiny and the professional assurance that was provided to us was massively helpful in making our own deliberations. I would also, you made reference to the roles of independent advisory groups, both in COP26 and also in the pandemic. There's a recent publication from Amnesty International where they talk about the confusion of the role of scrutiny with independent advisory groups. And I was certainly very clear. I know that John Scott, the Lord Scott, was very clear, and I know that HMI was very clear that the scrutiny role of SPA and HMI was formal, and what you were getting was a reference group to give advice from these, and hugely important it is too, but the scrutiny role is very clear within that. Your report makes reference to the fact that, disappointingly, we had no officers successful the Strategic Police National Assessment Centre in 2021, and I'm really pleased DCC Taylor's work in this as well, that we've had significant success in the current year. But in your role across the UK and as HMICS, are these fluctuations as low as zero to be expected, or is there an expectation of what we should be seeing as a consistent through flow of talent to eventually the Strategic Command Course?
I absolutely agree with your comments on IAGs and their advisory role. They're not a formal scrutiny role, but they do provide significant challenge when necessary. It's interesting, I was speaking to colleagues in HMIC FRS this week about SPNAC, Command Course and Leadership Development. There was a joint inspection with ourselves in HMIC FRS in 2019, I think it was, called Leading Lights, that talked about the journey from people developing all the way through to becoming chief officers, and the challenges that brings, not just in terms of achieving the levels, achieving the standards, and then becoming chief officers, but in terms of retention, recruitment, and cost, etc. And that's not just cost to the organisation, that's cost to the individual. Do I expect Police Scotland to be getting nil? No, I was disappointed and surprised by that last year when I saw the results. Delighted for the 3 candidates this year who are going to go through. And I've had conversations with all of them about, in the lead up to their processes, but since then as well. I have said to the Chief Constable, said to Fiona as well, that I see Scotland should be a net exporter with the level and the size of the force. And the challenges that senior roles within the organisation have, it would be great to see more people heading off and doing what Angela McLaren and David McLaren have done in the City of London, the Metropolitan Police and elsewhere. I think that's where Police Scotland should be going, and then attracting inward talent from other places as well. That mix and breadth of experience and different organisations is only to be welcomed. So I think last year was a bit of a blip. I would think that the work that's ongoing, and I know there's a lot of leadership development work has been brought through over the last couple of years, and I really welcome that. So keen to see that, keen to continue with that. And I've got to say, I am delighted to be welcoming Mark Hargreaves, Chief Superintendent, who is Silver Commander on COP26, to be my Assistant Inspector of Constabulary shortly. I see that again as development for him, and hopefully he will go back to Police Service of Scotland, having had a different experience that will help him with his future journey. Thank you.
I apologise, Chair. In the declarations of interest, I forgot to declare that I'm still, for the next 6 days anyway, Chair of the Care Inspectorate, and also as part of that, a member of Healthcare Improvement Scotland's board, which are referenced in the joint scrutiny activity part of this. Personally, I don't consider that enough to upset myself from the meeting, because it's just reporting that inspections have happened, and I don't benefit from it in any way. But I'll take your guidance on that if you want me to upset myself.
The meeting, thank you for, it'll be noted in a minute. Thank you. No more questions. There's a couple of comments from me to you, Craig Naylor. Firstly, you're critical, as you know, to our ability to have oversight. The inspection is a critical part of the triangulation of assurance that we seek on the effectiveness of policing. And it will not go unnoticed to you and me that our colleagues in Ireland, our equivalent police board, is now absorbing, or the other way around, your function in Ireland. So there's both an inspectorate and an accountability body merged. We're going to be interested to see how that works. But on a more serious note, our first line of assurance is the quality of our police officers. That is where the critical assurance from the board is taken. But your inspectorate is able to get deeper and further into areas which we are not able, because of our functions, to go to. And that's why we rely on your inspection reports. The final thing to say is something which I have noticed in discussing policing around the United Kingdom, just how comfortable Police Scotland is and the Chief Constable is with being a human rights-based police organisation. I think you'd be hard put to find that conversation held comfortably and clearly in another police service. I may accept the Police Service of Northern Ireland from that. So I think it's of great importance that we recognise that asset that we have about comfortably talking about human rights and policing in Scotland. Sometimes we are too insular in our views about policing, and we should be wider. And I would say other police services can lead for that. It was hardly mentioned, and ACC Tim Mez pointed this out at a conference I was at with him on the Police Foundation's review of policing in England and Wales. The word human rights appeared twice, referring to the same report and in passing. So thank you for your inspection. Thank you for the work that you do. We really rely on you, and I really appreciate that glass half full approach you said you're going to take. Because as we were talking in response to Grant's question about the open, if nothing happens, it goes unremarked. Nothing happening is a success in policing, and it takes an enormous amount of hard work for nothing to happen. Policing is such a huge event. So thank you very much, and thank you for attending. I'm very grateful for you for that. Thank you. We're now going to come on to our Chief Executive's report. Chief Executive Brown, present your report.
Thank you, Chair. My report is an update on matters of public interest in policing and covers 6 areas. Firstly, the authority has responded to the Scottish Government's consultation on the recommendations arising from Dame Eilish Angelini's independent review of police complaints handling, investigations and misconduct issues in relation to policing. The response was guided by a group of board members comprising the Chair, the Vice Chair, Alistair Hay and Professor McQueen, and the latter in their capacity as chairs of the Complaints and Conduct and People Committees. We will continue to engage with the Scottish Government colleagues throughout the legislative process. At the last meeting of the authority, I referred to the recent resource spending review, which has been touched on this morning, and the challenges that would arise from a flat cash settlement. Since then, staff in Police Scotland and the SPA have been modelling the implications of the various financial scenarios in order to enable discussions on future challenges and priorities. HMICS published their assurance review on strategic workforce planning, and HMICS will be attending the People Committee on the 31st of August to present their findings and recommendations directly to the board members. In July, the authority agreed to set up a short life oversight group to consider key risks in respect of drug driving, postmortem toxicology and spiking. In light of the first meeting, there is a recommendation to amend the terms of reference to have an explicit rather than an implicit reference to impact on public confidence and public safety. The authority has published its 21-22 annual report on the Independent Custody Visiting Scheme. The report, overseen by the Vice Chair, Jane Ryder, gives assurance that the independent visitors did not identify any issues or breaches of the UN standard in upholding human rights. And I'd like to again extend the appreciation and thanks of the authority to the 102 independent volunteers supported by the small team within SPA who deliver this vital public service. Work continues on the review of the strategic police plans with feedback being sought from key stakeholders. Chair, it's not referenced in my report, but I would like to highlight the 6 members and I visited the contact centre at Govan on Friday the 19th of August. The Chief Constable has already referred to that, and so have some of the board members. This was a valuable visit for members, and we were taken through the journey of a call and saw the resolution team's mental health pathways process. On behalf of the members who were present, can I put on record our thanks to the C3 Commander, Temporary Chief Superintendent Paul Wilson, and his colleague, Superintendent David Reid, Temporary Superintendent David McIntosh, Temporary Chief Inspector Lindsay Booth, and the National Service Centre Manager, Laura Henderson. Chair, I would like to ask the Board to both note my report and approve the amended terms of reference for the Forensics Toxicology Oversight Group. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Well, firstly, can we note the report? And secondly, can we approve that amendment, small amendment to the toxicology terms of reference? Thank you very much. Are there any questions for the Chief Executive? Okay. Ahead of schedule, and I see the Director of Forensic Services arrived. I'm going to both please her and disappoint her in saying that I would like us to take, if James Gray is on the line, the scheme of financial delegation, which is shorter, and then have our planned lunch break after that, and then come back.
Chair, I'm doing the financial.
Oh, you're excellent. My notes say financial regulations. Can we do that then? Chief Executive, would that be okay?
Thank you, Chair. I'm doing the financial regulations. Mr. Gray will speak to the financial monitoring report later on.
Okay.
So if I may just...
Michael, of
thank
course,
you, Chair.
yeah.
The authorities carried out a detailed end-to-end review of the financial regulations, which includes looking at the financial values they're delegated or given pre-approval from the board to its committees and all the way through to Police Scotland. This is the first time we've completed a full review since the service was created, and this work aimed to ensure that the authority's scrutiny and oversight is appropriate, proportionate and value-adding. A summary of the changes proposed is included in Appendix A, and the full revised financial regulations and updated corporate governance framework is included in Appendix B. To get to this point, Chair, this has taken a lot of work and collaboration and lots of engagement across the SPA with our colleagues in the Scottish Government and most importantly with our colleagues in Police Scotland. The review was also benefited from sponsorship from the SPA Vice Chair, and it has been recommended to the Board by the Resources Committee. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Maybe I can't. Sorry, Mary Pitt-Casely.
Chair, not really a question, but a comment. I recognise just how much work has gone into this. It's very comprehensive, and it's been a very thorough piece of work. So just to commend everybody involved, including the Vice Chair and the Chief Executive. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much. Grant, do you want to make any additional comment?
Thank you, Chair. The only comment I wish to make is to endorse what Mary has said about the particular huge amount of work that John McNellis and others have put into actually updating and reviewing every aspect of these regulations, which we have studied in some depth at Resources, and hopefully the revised regulations will actually streamline the whole process of a lot of day-to-day business to everybody's advantage. But we're very comfortable to recommend them.
Thank you very much. The Board approve? Thank you. Thank you very much. Ahead of the schedule I have, I intend to ask you to break for lunch now in order to give full time to the next items, which are critical for the Board. So if I could ask you to return at 25 to 1, 35 minutes? Yes? Yes. And thank you for this morning's session. Thank you. Welcome to the afternoon session of the Scottish Police Authority. We're on to agenda item 8, and I welcome Fiona Douglas, a Director of Forensic Services, to present her report. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. So I will take my report as read and highlight a number of areas that I believe will be of interest to members. First, I'd like to provide an update with regards to drugs driving toxicology provision, which I reported to the last meeting of the authority. At the last meeting, I had highlighted that between the start of the legislation for drugs driving being implemented and the 20th of May this year, 386 cases were unable to proceed to prosecution due to delays within the laboratory in relation to toxicology testing. Further analysis of those 386 cases has now been completed by Police Scotland, the Crown Office and Forensic Services, and that number has reduced to 384. As part of that analysis, we have identified that there are 2 cases that involve a minor injury to a third party and a further injury to a suspect. 40 of those cases relate to traffic collisions, and around about a quarter of them relate to potential repeat offenders. The work has certainly highlighted a number of areas where we can look at improvement across the system. Forensic Services is currently in the final stages of agreeing a new outsourcing contract, which will allow further flexibility in outsourcing of these toxicology cases. And that is supported by agreement from Scottish Government for an additional 370,000 of funding to support that outsourcing this financial year. There are a number of improvements that have been or are in the process of being undertaken in relation to drugs driving toxicology work. That includes implementation of new processes in Police Scotland for the submission of samples to Forensic Services Laboratory, recording of additional information which allows better tracking, management and reporting of cases, additional activity within the laboratory to address the backlog and to improve the turnaround time of the toxicology analysis, and acceleration of recruitment into Forensic Services to build additional capacity and resilience within the function. We continue to work across the Gold Command structure and through a Silver Improvement Group with colleagues across the system, and including Scottish Government, with a view to developing that sustainable system-wide solution that will meet not only current but future demand for this service. In addition, we are working with HMICS, who are undertaking the review of the end-to-end process for obtaining, analysing and reporting drugs driving blood sample results, and we have provided the initial self-evaluation to HMICS to support that process. Moving on, the senior management team within Forensic Services, as I've reported before, has been going through a restructure, and I'm pleased to be able to report to the authority that from the 1st of August, the newly restructured senior management team is now in place. I particularly highlight the new roles within the senior management team of Chief Operating Officer and also Head of Forensic Infrastructure and Support, which are filled by Vicky Morton and Alan Connell, respectively. Moving on to the broader operating model staff consultation, I'm pleased to report that given the slight delay there in me providing my report before lunch, I'm able to confirm that we have successfully presented the final outcome of the consultation on our new operating model to the Joint Negotiating and Consultative Committee this morning, and that was a very successful meeting, and that now will allow the formal end to that consultation process. So that covers the implementation of the new operating model, access to laboratory, and deployment of scene examination projects, which were approved by the authority in September of last year. This is a substantial consultation process, and I really do recognise, along with other members of the senior management team, the pressure that has put on all staff across Forensic Services over this difficult period, and it has been a long consultation process lasting since November of last year through to today. I'd also like to pass on my thanks to the trade unions for their continued engagement and help throughout that consultation process and in reaching a successful conclusion. We now move into a phase of implementation, which will take some time to consider. Clearly, the impact of a potential flat cash budget settlement will mean that we have to look at the implementation plans for the new operating model and to make sure that we phase those improvements and the different aspects of implementation in an appropriate manner once the budget settlement for next financial year and beyond is more clear. Moving on to Operation Weaver, which is the transfer of the post-mortem toxicology services from Glasgow University to Forensic Services. This project is running very well, and we are on track to transition those services for a go-live on the 1st of December 2022. I was very pleased to welcome the Cabinet Secretary for Justice, the Chair of the Authority and the Chair of the Forensic Services Committee to the 5th and newest Forensic Services Laboratory in Govan at Junction 24 a few weeks back. I think we had some really excellent discussions with regards to the new service and also the opportunities that that brings to Forensic Services toxicology provision moving forward. And finally, in relation to the Skye incident that's been referred to earlier in the meeting, I would like to commend the Forensic Services staff that have been sent to Skye to support Police Scotland in their investigation in this terrible incident. We have had a number of scene examination staff deployed from our scene examination locations in the north, but also supported by firearms scientists from the Scottish Crime Campus, and also supported by our lead forensic scientist for major crime in terms of pulling together the overall forensic response in support of Police Scotland. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for your report on Forensic Services, Director Douglas. Can I ask Paul Eadie, who chairs our Forensic Services Committee and our Toxicology Oversight Group, to make any comments or observations on that report?
Yes, excuse me, thanks very much, Chair. As Fiona highlighted, there has been good progress made in addressing the backlog of drug driving cases. And obviously also the Oversight Board is going to look at drug driving at Project Weaver as well, but also at the issue of spiking. And we'll be looking at that in a bit more depth. It gives us an opportunity to do a deep dive, and that will subsequently be brought back to the Forensic Services Committee and ultimately via that to this board. So we will be looking at that, and hopefully we'll get something reported back to you as quickly as we can.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments or observations or questions on the report? Grant McRae.
Thank you, Grant, for the question. I think with regards to where Forensic Services is within our transformation programme, we are at quite a challenging point where we are about to initiate implementation based on a business case that was presented and approved back in September of last year. And clearly, we are operating in a very different circumstances now. The scope of the change, and perhaps more importantly, the pace of the change, needs to reflect the current financial climate I think it's really important within forensic services that we're very committed to the direction of change that the organisation needs to make, and in particular in transforming forensic service provision to local policing, as well as responding to other challenges in demand, such as in drugs driving toxicology analysis. We have developed an initial strategic workforce plan, and I think that points us to where we need to grow forensic services to make sure that we can respond to those changing needs of our partners in Police Scotland and the Crown Office, so that we have the capacity that we need, but that we're also progressing that transformation to speed up the services that we provide in particular and maintain the very high quality standards which we have for the delivery of forensic science.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alistair Hay and then DCC Graham. Alistair.
Thank you, Chair. And again, Fiona, thank you very much for your report. I think it's very important that you did recognise the work that the forensic scene examiners have been undertaking, and I'm sure are currently undertaking in Skye, that team approach in such a tragic event. It's very important to recognise all of the teams, so thank you for that. I just wanted to pick up on 2.5, where you've indicated that there's an additional £370,000 being agreed by Scottish Government for an outsourcing contract for this year. What's the thoughts beyond this year about the long-term sustainability of a contract to meet perhaps a growing demand, because you're already indicating it's a higher than expected demand for this type of service in relation to drug driving toxicology?
Thank you for the question. I think it's important to note that these are sticking plasters that we're putting in place over the demand that exists for drugs driving toxicology analysis, which is far higher than expected since the legislation was implemented. The actions which we have in place address the immediate risks and issues, and the 370,000 of outsourcing, which will be spent between September and the end of March this financial year, will certainly go some way to reducing and addressing the backlog situation that I've been reporting into the authority. There is a need for a long-term sustainable solution for the delivery of toxicology analysis, and work has been done and is with the Scottish Government with regards to options for what that long-term sustainable model could look like. As part of the improvement work which we are addressing collaboratively with regards to this issue, there is a need and an action captured to review the demand forecasts for the next financial year and beyond with regards to how we expect the demand for this type of service to grow. And I think that it's very important that we forecast and then approach Scottish Government with regards to a medium-term solution which is required prior to a decision being made around what the long-term sustainable model will be.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's very helpful.
Thank you. DCC Graham.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to take this opportunity to commend the progress that's now been made through the joint working that we've continued to progress round about the challenges with the toxicology issues, and raise two main points round about that. The first one is hopefully a helpful reminder that the impact of this, and I was really pleased to be able to influence the slight amendment to the terms of reference for the oversight group, the impact of this is seen through the criminal justice system, but primarily on what this data is telling us, that the roads can be unsafe when people are driving under the influence of drugs, and our duty, our overriding collective duty, is to ensure that the roads are a safer place. And the consequence of where we find ourselves is potentially an impact not just on these critical cases, victims who are involved and accused people potentially not being progressed through the system, but actually public confidence in our ability to do that, and the progress that we're now making against that is incredibly important. There's a similarity in the spiking, where clearly there's an increased public vigilance and reporting, and again, rightly, our focus on victims, investigation, and prevention is all underpinned by the capacity in the system, and Fiona's articulated very clearly the progress that's been made to ensure that we can match our aspirations now and in the future. And then finally, I just want to emphasise the commitment that Police Scotland have towards that joint working. It's only through a commitment to that constructive dialogue with the Crown, SPA, Forensics that will implement the improvement plan and the high level of ambition that's now there. And I'm confident that we can do that. And of course, we'll support the HMIC work, which will bring through further detail and no doubt suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just want to compliment you, DCC Graham, on the support you gave me over this process when we first heard about it, and then working with our Chief Executive to find a quick solution. And you set up almost immediately a Gold Command system, and you gave us advice about some of the options we had. And I discussed with you before I invited HMIC to do an independent inspection here. One of the things I was keen to put into the HMIC inspection was not just what went wrong, but also what preventative and public information campaigns can we get into the system to have a strategy for dealing with what is quite clearly a far higher incidence of drug driving than was estimated in the past, and is on a par now with some of the other forms of antisocial behaviour in the roads and in our public spaces. So I very much look forward to that report, and thank you very much, DCC Graham, for your support. Are there any other questions? I will now, following the update in the papers on the drug driving testing and analysis and our consideration of it within Paul Eadie's groups, I'll write to the Cabinet Secretary to provide him an update, which I undertook to do at our last board meeting, and I expect to be updated at the board. We expect to be updated at every board meeting for the foreseeable future on the progress here. So thank you for your team, and just congratulations to those of your staff who have been promoted. And what I do know, and I say to the board, I know in speaking to Fiona very regularly, that performance management of forensic services is one of her key priorities, and her team is now strengthened around this area. And I think we will see the benefit of that through the public reporting to your group and then the reporting here. So thank you for all your work on that. If I can move on to our next item, I thought you were going to ask. No, you're not going to. No, I can move on. So item 10 is Local Policing Service Delivery Review. And this is the report and the discussion from Police Scotland. And the report will be led by DCC Will Kerr and supported by ACC Tim Mares. DCC Kerr.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'm going to make some opening comments, if I may, just some contextual, hopefully helpful contextual comments before I hand over to Tim, who'll give us a wee bit of flavouring on the paper as well. The paper contains some of the context that led us to wanting to do a review of local policing services 10 years, nearly 10 years now since the creation of Police Scotland. The paper talks about demand profile that has fundamentally changed, volume of high harm calls we've seen change fundamentally, and certainly that balance of calls and demand that we have coming into policing in Scotland has been exacerbated by the pandemic as well. And you'll have seen some of that when the board members attended C3, just that sort of wide suite of calls that come in that might not necessarily have traditionally needed a police response, but in the absence of anybody else, as we were saying earlier, now does. It would have been normal for us when we exited the pandemic to reassess and recalibrate how local policing services are delivered, not least because we haven't been in a position to do that, or we haven't done that since 2013. I think the spending review pressures that the Chief has been talking about, and yourself quite a lot during this particular board meeting, have simply added more import onto the need to do that. It is not a driver, but by necessity, if we can only afford less officers in the future, we're going to have to look at the structure and provision of how we deliver one of the very important elements of policing communities across Scotland, that local interface between every community and every part of the country and the local police service. We probably should be very clear about what this is not. And we've certainly no preconceived ideas about what we want out of this process. It's not simply a numbers game for us. It's not simply about reduction of numbers. We are deeply conscious that the perception may be exactly that, but that is not our starting point. Our starting point is to manage the changing profile of demand that comes into Police Scotland, to continue to protect and enhance our local presence and visibility in communities right across the country, and to do so in a way that gets the efficiencies and effectiveness of the scale and size of this organisation as the second largest police service in the United Kingdom. So when I say that we've got no preconceived ideas about what we would like to get out of this, we have had a number of very early conversations with probably our most important service delivery partner and local authorities, and it is going to be a genuinely co-designed process. COSLA are a key partner in this, and we've had an agreement from COSLA that they are going to approach us in a co-designed manner. Tim will be happy to talk through in a wee bit of detail exactly what the process is for that and what that will look like in terms of a wee bit more detail. I think that the incrementalist approach that we're taking is probably also very sensible. We've picked a couple of pilot divisions to look at initially and to test some of our thinking in this space. And those two test or pilot divisions are one in the Central Belt and Sea Division and one up in the north of the country in the Highlands and Islands, again to reflect the fact that local policing services aren't a one-size-fits-all solution to the differing needs of urban, rural, remote and island communities right across Scotland. So we're purposefully trying to challenge ourselves right at the very beginning about what's the best type of flexible but consistent local policing services that we deliver to communities right across the length and breadth of the country. Why are we bringing this today? Well, probably for two relatively simple reasons. One is it is in keeping with the spirit of the MOU that yourself as Chair and the Chief Constable signed last year to come as early as possible with an issue that we know is going to be of significant strategic import to policing, but also of significant public interest. And even though we might not have the specificity today that you might like, we're coming as early as possible to have that conversation about are we missing anything obvious? Here's what we would like to do in this space and how we're going to approach the business. And then secondly, just a sense check how and when you would like to do assurance on this very important project as well. So those are the only fairly obvious but simple introductory contextual points I wanted to make, Chair. And if you don't mind, I'm going to hand over to ACC mayors perhaps to give a wee bit of flavouring about the project, and then very happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. ACC Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. This paper's before the board today by agreement for discussion. I think that is representative of the fact that this touches into an area of business that benefits from a really, really high level of ownership within the communities that we police, but also within the SPA and within other partners. And therefore, in recognition of the fact that we're planning to seek to review this area and seek to co-design it, we're also mindful of the need from the outset to involve as many people as possible in that discussion. The focus of this piece of work is very clearly in the name on service delivery. At an early stage, we talked about a review of local policing as a service, but actually what's more important is that we focus on the fact that all policing is experienced locally. The Chief Constable talked about the tragic incidents in Skye, and whilst that's something that required national support from both forensic services and from the national divisions, it happened in a local community and was experienced there. The first people who responded to that were local police officers, and the local context in which Police Scotland operated was fundamental to the management and response to that. So we changed the focus of this work at a very early stage to focus on service delivery. And the purpose of that is to move away from talking about a specific unit or division within Police Scotland and instead to focus on the people, places and communities who rely on us to keep them safe and protect them. And I think that's a really important piece, setting out from the outset how we wish to progress. I think another element about that service delivery focus then is wanting to move the debate, and I think this is something that we've all acknowledged, move the debate now beyond simply the understanding of demand to the understanding of impact. We have a really, really comprehensive understanding of the demand that we experience, but part of this work will be to understand how we can manage that demand in a positive way to reduce the demand over time through positive impacts in communities and developing the evidence base as to what that service looks like. And I think what's really exciting is there's best practice all across Scotland as to how we deliver these services in an early intervention and prevention way. The opportunity of the service delivery reviews to bring those together. And I think a really good analogy to help explain that is the Chief Constable's oft used references to the National Health Service and how the various levels of service are experienced. This is the kind of the review in very many ways at the GP level service. That by necessity, we want that to identify problems really early. We want that to offer really effective solutions to folks, that they don't have to progress to more intensive services that are both disruptive to them and expensive to society. But there's also a really strong balance, I think, within that model, which is, regardless of where you are in Scotland, you can access the same range of services, but you may access them differently depending on the geographical and topographical issues around that. So I think that's hopefully very helpful. Some of the context is, as DCC Care mentioned, the drivers are in the paper around that. One of the other reasons as to why we're doing this now is, in real terms, it's not something that we have done before. There was a basic model for local policing at the outset of Police Scotland, but actually that more fundamental understanding is critical. Local policing represents the bulk of resources within Police Scotland, and therefore it's important that we're able to put on the table and articulate effectively a costed delivery model that demonstrates that we're delivering best service to the public that we serve, and also to reassure you of that fact. I think another reason as to why now is that as an organisation, and a number of people have mentioned this today, nearly 10 years on from the creation of Police Scotland, there is a level of maturity there, not only in our data, but the Chief Constable has mentioned and others that the rollout of a single crime system, which is well underway, and I visited a number of divisions where that's live, and that's been really well received. And that will deliver massive benefits and will be an enormous milestone for us, but also in our understanding of the demand that we talked about. We're at that stage of maturity now when we can start to help that inform our design. And the other area of maturity is around our relationships with key partners, and the Chief Constable talked about those relationships with local authorities and with COSLA, and that very much, as DCC Care mentioned, is at the heart of this. DCC Care has mentioned around the methodology, the choice of two divisions, and I'll not repeat his points around our desire to stretch ourselves around that, but another reason to pick two divisions was to step into this in a gentle way. We want to do the work in two places where we can involve and engage with a wide range of partners around that. We can show our working, we can engage in deeper discussions, and actually bring other commanders to the table as well, so that we can start to see that. The concept of de-risking really is at the heart of this, that we want to start small, we want to build a really strong evidence base, and then on the back of that we want to bring forward proposals as to what we think that means for a wider organisational model. And to give you some reassurance, this is not seeking to reinvent the wheel. We will be using a lot of the existing data that is already there. So the work from the Demand and Productivity Unit, the work that went into the Strategic Workforce Plan, an awful lot of the finance data that's already there. We have an awful lot of that, but the opportunity is to bring this together now into one place and start to ask the so what questions around that. So the products that will fall out of this, I've already mentioned the de-risking element of that. The intention will be to bring forward a prototype service delivery model with clear benefits and measures around what we think that will deliver and how we think we can demonstrate that, but also a rollout plan and a business case for what that looks like for the rest of local policing. We're at a very early stage in this, and I wouldn't presume to know definitively how we will do that. So the purpose of this essential discovery phase is to try and establish that. Finally, just the next steps. The programme is now recruiting and building up the team, although work has already begun by the small core team that are already there to collate a lot of the information we've discussed. We're working with staff at the SPA to bring forward a proposal for senior oversight of this programme, and there will very much be an SPA involvement within that to ensure that we provide you with assurance ongoing. And then ultimately within the 12-month period at the conclusion of that, we hope to bring back a business case setting out those factors that I've referenced. So Chair, that's some opening comments, but I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Going to come Katrina Stewart first.
I find that really interesting presentation. Thank you very much indeed. I mean, obviously this is a very high level piece, and welcoming the invitation to have the conversations and input. My question is really just around a bit more detail, which I realise you don't necessarily have. But I'm very interested to know a wee bit more about your community engagement work. And DCC Care, you talked about COSLA, but we've had this conversation before around how do you spread the reach into the communities, and how this work would tie in with the seldom heard voices and lived experience type work that you're already doing. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, as indicated at the outset, a lot of our work will be with the Strategy and Insights team under Director McMahon. So I've been massively impressed with a lot of the engagement work that they've been doing already. So it seemed like a fantastic opportunity to harness that work and start to use that to inform our service design approach. So at the outset, we definitely want to link on that. I was chatting to Amanda today about the deprived communities work that the SPA are leading on, and we're keen to link in with that and draw that together as well. So that's the first part. At a local level, we will be ensuring that we involve all partners within the local authorities and within the divisions that we're doing the work, and that will be critical. Sitting above that, then, I think there is dedicated work that DCC Cares referenced, particularly with COSLA, and I would anticipate Public Health Scotland, about how we align some of that broader public sector reform work that we know Scottish Government have talked about and that we're all committed to. And at a very strategic level, then, that oversight group, which we hope will be populated in a way that allows us to tap into some really good strategic advice and guidance around where we need to go as an organisation. So it's trying to seek to bring all of that through. The service design approach as well is designed to capture voices and journeys. So a lot of our work to date, as you know, has been around data, but this is actually about experiences. It's about pathways. It's about how a victim of crime picking up the phone experiences the journey, and how we can start to build that in alongside the data to give us a really rich picture.
Thank you. Fiona McQueen and then Katharina Casper.
Thanks very much. And your presentation covered a number of areas I was interested in. And it may well be that the plan for your work means that you're going to capture what's needed for service before what I'm going to ask you about, and that's about well-being and workload measurement for staff. So I'd be interested to know, so it's great, you've explained the productivity unit will be in, and that will be really helpful. So I would be helpful for me to understand the workforce, so how you'll get their voice into shaping this, but also as you develop a plan and a new model, will there be an opportunity to be able to look at workload measurement and well-being of staff in at the same time, or will that come later?
So I think that's where this work's really important. We've been able to provide, again, through the work of the Demand Productivity Unit, very high-level detail of where we see increased demand. Where this work offers the opportunity is to start to put the human stories to that. What are the implications for a sergeant in a team managing frontline services or in a public protection unit who is managing all of these multiple demands, and our ability to sit, to listen to their experiences, to monitor how they work, and to start to map that out so that we can start to tell that story and understand that. The recommendation in Damiela Shangelini's report was around sort of our frontline supervision, and we have led some work already on the rank ratio numbers, but actually there's a deeper question in the Angelini recommendation about workloads and volumes and what the priorities are for those. So this work specifically will allow us to start to drill into that and understand that. And the welfare and well-being element has to be at the heart of that, because the multiplicity of demands on the front line are so complex. I think that this service design work, this journey work, is really the primary way that we'll be able to understand what the implications are for our officers and staff, but also show us opportunities to redesign that with them, because as we all know, in the vast majority of cases, the people who know what the solutions are the people on the front line, and that's essentially what we're trying to capture.
Thank you. Katharina Casper and then Michelle Miller.
Thank you, Chair. A really fascinating report, and I think the picture you've painted certainly makes it very difficult to disagree with the course of direction, because I think everybody will be very supportive of this. And you've also, I think, quite eloquently outlined why the time is right to do this just now. So again, some of my questions have already been answered, but maybe if I just, because ACC Maris, you talked around the maturity of data, and I think it's quite reassuring that obviously we're not starting from scratch. So with that in mind, I was wondering, firstly, what additional data and insights do you think you need to gather before you can actually start with the process? And then why do you think will it take you 12 months to do that? Again, I note that you talked, this is the initial discovery phase. So I assume the second stage will be the prototype model development that you also mentioned. So why the timelines? And also, I wonder, what are your thoughts? Because obviously demand is not static. So there is, would you think there might be a risk that from the start of your process to the end and the completion, by the time you have a model, that some of the parameters might have shifted? So just what are your thoughts around that?
Sorry, just scribbling, so don't forget. So I think some of the gaps for us, I think if you look at the end-to-end model for a member of the public or a victim contacting police, they phone into a national contact management service, C3, who have a recognised defined model. And at the far end then, once we've completed investigations and inquiries, we're progressing their case, along with all the paperwork, into a National Criminal Justice Services Division, which is increasingly exceptionally well designed in conjunction with the Crown Office. The bit in the middle at the moment is the bit that we haven't defined. And I suppose to your point around data gaps, a lot of this is about our processes and some of that mapping element to maximise the efficiency, but also to gain that user experience from our officers and staff. Are the pieces that we're providing them, we've talked about a lot of them today, estates, our fleet, our ICT, are they being kind of coordinated in a way that maximises the benefit to our officers? I've seen really strong evidence of where it is. The mobility solution that a number of officers have shown me, I think, is excellent, and they can demonstrate the benefits every day. So our opportunity to harness that and start to define processes. So I think that process element is a really, really key gap for us. Without that, you have your demand on one side, you have your resources on the other, and it's very hard to connect the two, which I guess is probably some of what the struggle was with the strategic workforce plan. And that opportunity to fill that gap now is key. Why the timelines? We have allowed significant time for mobilisation, so that is in recognition of the fact that we do have challenges around recruitment into the change space, despite the fact that's been really well managed by Andrew Hendry. So we did want to allow time to get the right people in place to take that work forward. And I think as we do that, and as we start to move into now the specific planning phase, we can nail some of that down. That timeline does include the development of a prototype model as well. So by the end of the 12 months, we should have that work done. So I'll be keen to progress on that basis. And in many ways, I think the demand will continue to shift. The focus for us isn't just about capturing the demand, it's about developing the methodologies that allow us to constantly monitor the demand and our ability to respond in a flexible way to that. Actually, as an organisation, at a local level, we're exceptionally flexible in how we respond to demand because every day it shifts across the country, and our divisional commanders manage that really, really well. But I think our opportunity to understand how strategically we support that and facilitate that more effectively will be key. Hope that answers everything.
Thank you.
I was just going to add one more point, Katerina. Undoubtedly, one of the outcomes we would like from this work is a more flexible model that takes account of seasonal adjustments, annual changes in demand. But actually, it's not just about the model, it's about the mindset as well. And what we're trying to do is challenge ourselves to try and shift the default question from what has happened to what could happen and how do we with partners prevent it happening. And that is a mindset shift, and I think we are genuinely pushing ourselves on partners to say that the system doesn't think like a collective whole sometimes. And as the Chief was saying earlier on, if we're the volume entry point into a lot of that system, then we have a significant point of leverage and influence to start to shift the point of emphasis around those questions as well. So model and mindset is what we're trying to get out of this.
Thank you very much. Michelle Millett, then Jane Ryder. Michelle first.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the report. I really welcome it. I think it's a really positive step. I suppose that my question, so I think that one of the advantages of the National Service is that you can have a focus on local delivery, but consistency in terms of standards, in terms of accessibility, etc. So I think that's really positive. And this review presumably will allow a kind of national perspective on the differences in terms of local resourcing and levels of demand and the extent to which the local resourcing can meet that demand that might then not compare well or might compare better to different local areas. So if that's one of the advantages, what I'm slightly concerned about is, given the timescale that you've described for a review for 2 local areas, what are the implications if one of the benefits is that you're going to look at all of the areas to allow that kind of national perspective, and how long it will take to do all of the others? And then there's a potential that what you might do is actually have a really positive review of individual local areas, but what you won't have is a sense of what does that mean for, in terms of the whole picture, and the potential for resource reallocation where it might be appropriate in order to maintain those standards across right across the country. So it's the, if that's the purpose, and if I've understood it correctly, versus the timescale that it's likely to take for you to do it all, and therefore to have intelligence that will allow you to make the improvements that you're looking to do, if that makes sense.
No, it makes absolute sense, and I'll be honest, it's the one aspect of this that tends to wake me up at about 3 in the morning. The purpose of taking this proof of concept approach is to try and inform what we think a rollout will look like. I think if I came to you today and told you that I was confident about how I would roll out a single model to 13,500 police officers across, a country as diverse and as large as Scotland, I would be unsurprised if you were somewhat sceptical around that. So there will be a number of options, I think, at the end of this around, do we continue to go division by division, which obviously will allow a very bespoke model, but will take us an awfully long time. Or do we look at, as we travel along this route with other divisional commanders, seeking to develop what we think is the core model for the whole of Scotland, and then what we think are the options and the variables based on the geographical location of those divisions. Instinctively, I think as we start that conversation, I would be hopeful that by the end of this, we have a proposal that doesn't require us to go 2 divisions per year for sort of the next 6 or 7 years, but that we can find a different way of doing that. But I think it's only right and proper that I say the jury's out on that right now, and I imagine it'll be a topic that we'll discuss with yourselves at some point along that journey, because it is the critical factor around this.
Thank you very much. Jane Ryder and then Grant McRae. Jane.
Very much, and I think I'm picking up on both what Katerina has said and what Michelle has said, and it's around timelines. And for me, that subject I raised earlier of how it interacts with the community justice strategy, given Police Scotland and local policing is a key delivery partner, and we're looking for a delivery plan in 2022. So just how those match up, and how you're going to involve all parties, not just in an advisory capacity, but in the collaborative capacity, which is the essence of the Vision for Justice and the community justice strategy. So I suppose this is just, it's a question now and a recurring question, I think, as we go through. Thank you.
So, yes, I was interested by your comments around the community justice strategy. I think it probably touches on the deeper issues of really going back to the Christie principles and talking about how do we develop a conscious model with partners that integrates those principles to the heart of it. I think there's a really strong evidence base that community-based justice is more effective, it's less costly, and it reduces repeat demand. So there is a challenge in here about how we collectively develop a model that enhances prevention and reduces failure demand. Like I talked about the GP model, we do want folks to get as early and as low profile an intervention as possible to reduce the more expensive, costly and damaging, well not damaging, but certainly intrusive interventions that occur at a later stage. So I think whilst in the midterm we will respond to that, the Service Delivery Review team are already there to act as a point of contact around how that's been developed to not only inform that, but also reflect back on that. And that applies not just to our colleagues in criminal justice, but clearly the work that's being led from the national divisions, including the policing in the digital world element, which has been led by DCC Graham's folks, the intelligence programme, and also the public protection development programme, which is fundamental. So this is very, very much a co-designed piece of work, both internally and externally. I think the challenge will come, as we move through the discovery phase, when we get to the design phase, is how we do involve everybody. It's again one of the reasons why we've chosen to go very local, because we can work with specific partners to do that specific design element. And certainly already our engagements with key partners on the ground demonstrate, and I think DCC Care indicated that there is a real openness to wider dialogue about service integration, about aligning services, and about actually, and I've been really impressed by this, that despite some of the challenges that we may have financially across local authorities and police, and that commitment not to throw out the early intervention and prevention approach, but actually push into it, because we believe that's the way we can actually deliver better services and reduce demand at the more expensive parts of the system, which is inevitably whenever things go wrong. So I hope that answers that.
I think I welcome that commitment and look forward to seeing how it's introduced and carried forward. Thank you.
Before Grant, can I just bring in DCC Graham? Wants to make a comment?
Thanks, Chair. And since I indicated, ACC Mayors has actually covered the point, but I'll just, for reassurance, emphasise, the key attribute of Police Scotland that the Chief Constable and others have consistently emphasised is flexibility, mobility, agility in terms of that link between national specialist support across the whole country and a very localised policing response and community policing capability as well. But whether that's across major investigations, as we've heard today, national child abuse, rape, domestic abuse teams, or indeed into other operational functions like roads policing, public order, firearms. And the point that I would emphasise that ACC Mayors has already made in answer to Michelle's question, we are taking forward this overall service delivery approach amongst all of the programmes that are being led, whether it's the Public Protection Development Programme, the Policing in a Digital World, which members have heard quite a bit about and will hear more in the future, which draws from the Cyber Strategy and the Intelligence Development Programme, which make up the whole picture of change improvement against those changing and growing threats and demands that are the drivers for this work and all the other work that we're doing in the operational improvement space.
Thank you very much. Grant McRae, and a final question from Paul Eadie. Grant first.
Thanks, Chair. ACC Mayors, I found that a really interesting explanation as to what you're trying to do, and I'm fully supportive of the need to do it. You mentioned that one of the reasons for getting a slow start was having the right people to be able to form the team, if you like. I just wonder if you could clarify whether these are all current employees or whether you're having to get external support in there, because I appreciate that adds an extra dimension to it. But as most of my colleagues who've spoken already have mentioned, I suppose we're all a bit concerned about the fact that the initial stage will take 12 months, and then rolling it out across the rest of the organisation could take a bit longer, because there are some roll-on effects on things like the strategic workforce plan that it would be very unfortunate if we found that we were going to have to take rather a long time beyond the first 12 months to be able to adapt the strategic workforce plan and align whatever is going to be in that with what comes out of the review. And I wonder if you could just clarify a bit of that, please.
Yes, of course. So the composition of the team will be made up of a large proportion of police officers who have the experience and knowledge to kind of do a lot of the hands-on work within the divisions, but supported by a lot of our specialists from sort of the change side of the house. There will be recruitment to bring in additional numbers funded by reform to support that, but they will be Police Scotland staff. And again, the commitment for us is at the point of decision making, we did have a number of options about how we would resource this, and the desire was to use our own folks as much as we physically can to actually develop the skills and the knowledge and keep that within the organisation. So there may be some headspace there to seek additional support if that's required to maintain those timelines, because we are aware, I feel we've been realistic about the 12-month timeline, but we are committed to achieving that, and we will ensure that we do hit that target. To your point about, I guess, the crossover with the strategic workforce plan, it's something I think we've all been very mindful of. I regularly have conversations with Director McMahon, who's obviously taking the next version of the strategic workforce plan forward. I don't believe necessarily that this work has to complete in its entirety to allow us to develop a refreshed strategic workforce plan, but actually the areas that we focus on and some of the things that we can potentially deliver in the early stages can be identified by the strategic workforce planning team as to the gaps that maybe presented them challenges previously. And we do have the ability to prioritise those areas so that they maximise the results of what we're doing. So we are aligned. I don't believe there's a strict interdependency between one being delivered before the other. But like you, I'm very, very keen to make sure we don't end up delivering one out of sync with the other, and that we maximise the benefits of those two bits of work. That applies, I think, as well to a wide range of other bits of work, as DCC Graham mentioned, the change work across Police Scotland is all gathering information and data which will inform the strategic workforce plan. So the ability for us to harness all of that and build that into the model is really critical.
Come back in.
Chair, thank you. Grant, we have purposefully built some flexibility into the timeframes, as you would expect, and we can concertina if we need to. But we're also deeply conscious that even starting to do this work and talk about it could have a potential impact on public confidence, because we can talk about the need to rationalise our structures, we can talk about the need to, in a really clear, demand-profiled and very rational way, but this will be listened to emotionally and through political lens in an entirely different way. And local communities, the length and breadth of the country, they have a right to some sensitivity in how we approach that discussion as well. So some of the timeframes are purposefully extended so that we can have as broad and as inclusive a conversation as we possibly can with a wide range of people who are going to be affected by these services. If we need to truncate, though, we can abridge and truncate as we move through this. But we have done it purposefully to be inclusive and consultative and listen to the widest range of voices.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do understand what you're saying. I'm just conscious that if the first phase, if you like, of the review takes 12 months, it's the impact of being able to roll that forward to the rest of the organisation that perhaps worries me most. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Eadie.
Yeah, I'm going to take a slightly different tack, because I think the thing that concerns me about the report is the vagueness of it. And there's a lot of reference to co-production, and I'm a great believer in co-production. But frankly, you're the national experts in policing. And my criticism of the report is like the man that wasn't there. I don't see any sense of a described vision of what local policing is going to look like at the end of all this in the report. And if I were a partner in local government or the health service reading this, I think I would quite like to have seen that. You've teased out, ACC mayors, you've teased out some of the components that you'd see there, but it would have been quite good to have that down in writing for accountability purposes, if nothing else. So what my question is what vision, what will local policing look like? What do you intend it to look like at the end of this process? Noting that you've still got to get other people on board, but you must have some sense, broad brushstroke of what it will look like, what you won't be doing, for example, which I think is very important.
I'll start with that question, Paul. I have a slightly different perspective than you in terms of the stated outcome, in that we purposefully wanted to have that broad discussion so that people felt involved in the outcome and the desired end state for policing. But to answer your question specifically, safety and well-being in our Enabling Act is a fairly broad suite of responsibilities. And what success for us in professional policing terms will look like for this significant bit of work is that we have an integrated, with partners, flexible service delivery model that prevents as much harm as possible. That's it. That's what we'd like to do. It's no more complicated than that. But actually, even the process of saying that and writing that down, we have found from experience, actually can be quite challenging, because other partners come in and say, well, why didn't you speak to us before you even defined what that end game should be? So I take the challenge, and it's a reasonable challenge, of course, but we're trying to be sensitive with partners and communities and how we approach this, and how I've defined that integrated, flexible prevention at its heart is what we're looking for. But we realise that there are so many equities with partners, so many component parts that are out with the gift of policing that determine the success of that preventative mindset, that would much rather do it alongside people than do it to them.
Thank you very much indeed. I consider this issue to be one of the most important future issues in terms of strategy of policing in Scotland. Police Scotland polices 1/3 of the landmass of the UK. You are overwhelmingly expert in rural, remote policing, policing 90 inhabited islands, as well as our urban and suburban policing. So local policing is critical. What I say, thank you for introducing it early, for all the caveats that all we've had here under the MOU. It's critical. We have sight of your thinking on this. And I think the vagueness is both a challenge and actually the appreciation that we have that your thinking is going to be shaped by your engagement. So I'd make those points. So the things I like about this report, which we're going to be looking for through it, is co-production. Easy to say, very hard to do, because your co-producers often have diametrically opposed views. You know that better than I do. evidence-based. I was reading yesterday the College of Policing research evidence assessment of 1,600 pieces of research on local policing. Good luck, Tim, reading through those. They tend to say the similar things. The iterative process, I think, is important to the board. You're learning as you go along. You've not got a big bang. And I think big bang theories of change have actually undermined some of the credibility of service providers. And the most important thing to say is the thing you mentioned about Christie Commission. Often people talk about the Christie Commission as primarily looking at prevention. Their first principle was people-focused. If this change is people-focused and impact-related, is what you said at the beginning, this will be a successful change focused on people in local areas receiving the police service that they think is appropriate. So, as I said, I do feel this is one of the big strategic issues you're bringing to us early, and I really look forward to you bringing it to us on a regular basis, both formally at the board, but through our committees and informally in our discussions. Chief Constable, you wanted to say something?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of reflections. I'm really grateful for the discussion. I think a couple of points I'd like to make, if I may, that this is deliberately coming early. This is going to be consultative. There is no set position that we have. And the reason I'm saying that is that actually these were all the criticisms that were given to Police Scotland in the early years. And as I've said repeatedly, I was part of that. So we imposed a firearms model across the whole of the country. Lack of consultation, lack of engagement. We had a local policing model and we had a local scrutiny model that we imposed with local partners. Lack of engagement, lack of awareness. So when we're going through change, what our learning has been is that we go early and we involve people. We listen as opposed to dictate, which has been the lessons of some of the early parts of Police Scotland. So I think inevitably the sort of counter side to that is maybe some of the vagueness that you know, fair enough, fair comment. But again, as Will and Tim have laid out, we're very conscious of that because this is going to be built and it's going to be built collectively, and it's authentic, genuine consultation and engagement. And then my second point actually takes us back, to my mind, to the spending review. And if you look and read the words that the Cabinet Secretary for Finance set out when she introduced the spending review to Parliament, the challenge that was laid out to reset the public sector, to look at your structures, look at your delivery model, get greater shared services, look at your approach to procurement. Grant's already mentioned the vast improvements we've made. Here we are again. You know, one of the few parts of the public sector that's actually gone through change and reform, and yet we're continuing that journey because we want to show that efficiency, that best value, that improvement in service to build that holistic model of safety and security that Police Scotland can uniquely provide. So just those two additional points. This is a deliberate approach. It's different from some of the changes we've introduced in the past. We've learnt from it, and I strongly endorse the approach that Will and Tim are taking. And then secondly, this relation back to the spending review. In my judgment, Police Scotland again is at the forefront of taking on the challenges that have been set out for us by government. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. I think that's a good place to end that conversation at this board, but it's the start of a conversation around Scotland and a start of a conversation through our governance oversight and structures with you, formal and informal. As I said, I will consider this one of the most important items of change you've got in front of you in terms of the way local people receive their local policing and perceive their local policing, both of which are important. Move on now to item 11. Thank you very much for the presentation. And this is the Financial Performance Quarter Review. I think I have this right. This is now James Gray. James, I wrongly introduced you to lead an item earlier on, so if you can appear on screen and present this.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this is the finance report that covers the periods from the 1st of April to the 30th of June, and I'll talk to the finance dashboard, which is at slide 2 of the appendix. So obviously we're still early in the financial year, but there are some trends that are starting to come through, and I'll touch upon a few of those. And starting with the revenue budget, For the year to date, we are £2.6 million over against the budget, and what that is represented by is we're starting to see inflationary pressures really hit into the non-pay budgets, and that is something that we expect for the rest of this financial year. And then also with regards to the pay budgets, we are seeing that whilst we are running under on police officer numbers, that is being offset by additional overtime. So whilst it's early in the year, this is the first time since I joined the service 6 years ago that we've had an overspend in a year-to-date position. But it's probably worth just putting that into context around the size of the overspend at this stage represents less than 1% of the year-to-date budget. So it's not, the budget isn't running away from us. And that's why, from a forecast perspective, we are forecasting that we will be able to deliver the budget, and that will require active management. But as I say, we're not a long way off course. But what we're forecasting for the end of the financial year is that we will continue to see an underspend on core police officer costs of around £21 million, and we will offset that to an extent through overtime. But we will also see about £10 million of pressure coming through on the non-pay budget, and as I say, largely inflationary driven into places like utilities, repairs and maintenance, and fuel costs for the fleet. So that's the overall position on revenue. With regards to capital, we are forecasting that we will deliver the full capital plan. On the year-to-date position, we're slightly behind budget, but we do expect that by the year end that we will have spent the full allocation. And then finally on reform, again, the forecast is that we will spend the full allocation of £25 million. But there are still a couple of questions around Scottish Government's approach to the reform budget for the rest of the year that need to be bottomed out as to whether or not they are going to allow the service to spend that full allocation. But we're hoping to get an answer on that during the course of this month. So it requires real active management from here on in for the rest of the financial year. By the time we get to period 5, which is the end of August, we will be looking at those numbers to see where we are compared to this Q1 review. And, as required, we will put forward proposals around making sure that we're doing what we need to do to keep the budget in balance. So I'll pause there, Chair, but I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Grant McRae, Chair of Resources, would you like to make any comment on our first quarter performance report?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, James. What you have just explained is totally consistent with what was discussed at the Resources Committee. We do appreciate that at the end of Q1, we're still at an early stage. So to some extent, what we were interested to know is any particular challenges or barriers that were going to take us through the rest of the financial year, whether the impact of having to get a consent to spend the reform money was going to actually have a knock-on effect, and actually delivery of any of that programme was one of the areas that was of concern to us. But and equally, the impact of inflation in a way that affects us, as opposed to general inflation. We've got very specific areas where inflation impacts on us, particularly on the cost of the building works that go on in there, repairs and maintenance, and also the energy costs, which has already been touched on. So we've got some very specific avenues in there, but the actual analysis of the spend, and you touched on the sort of additional legal costs and other things that are sometimes out with our control. What we're trying very hard to do is to avoid last-minute surprises coming through as the year progresses and unwinds. So I suspect that we'll have a further, more in-depth discussion at the end of Q2. But we're very happy with the explanations given in Q1. And thank you and your team for all the hard work that goes into that. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'd just like to put a little bit of colour on the kind of, if you like, the cold numbers here, because obviously we're under pressure. We're going to work to come back to budget, but some of the numbers are illustrative of some of the pressures that we've got at the moment and the effect it has on us as a service at the moment. So, yes, we've got a £21 million underspend on officer numbers, but we're allocating just under 12 million into police overtime, additional police overtime. So our core overtime budget is 12.9 million. So effectively, I'm doubling that. And I can only double that because of the massive underspend, because of the shortfall in numbers. What that effectively means is we're forecasting we're going to ask the officers and staff to do double the overtime that we would usually plan for. And that's to try and maintain operational service delivery. As the Chief Constable's already said, maintaining that level of operational service delivery reliant just on overtime brings many risks, not least of all to the officers themselves and the officers and staff, but also in terms of the quality of the kind of maintenance of service delivery. The other thing which I'd like to highlight is for the month that's just gone, the July month, that's 1 month after Q1, we're already £600,000 over what I've already allocated for overtime. So although I've doubled the overtime to try and keep the officer numbers, cover that gap if you like, I've already spent £600,000 extra. So we do need to take management action. But I have to take management action from a budgetary perspective, because just on the overtime, if that continued for the rest of the year, would be £4.8 million over budget. Now, put that to one side, I'm not sure it's a sustainable model to be pouring overtime money in at that rate to try and keep operational service delivery. And it's something that the Chief and the Deps and myself have discussed in terms of both well-being and risk. The other side of it is estates and utility and fuel. So I've instructed our estates team not to carry out any repairs and maintenance other than health and safety, P1, P2. And the board will remember a few years ago, I had to go down that road where we were only making really urgent repairs. The issue with that, of course, is what it does do is generate huge amounts of frustration for officers and staff, because what we're not doing is fixing the stuff other than the stuff that's falling apart. And actually for Police Scotland, in terms of kind of economic use of our money, only dealing with stuff that fails is not economic. I can't do preventative fixes now. I can't kind of stop the roof falling down. If I know it's falling down, but it hasn't fallen down, I can't do it. I have to wait until it collapses and then I'll fix it. So that's the position we're in at the moment. So CFO James is correct in the sense that we're going to bring it back in, but bringing it back in, the actual manifestation of that in impact on officers, impact on service delivery, impact on living conditions is actually quite profound, and we're only 4 months in. So it is causing me a lot of angst, if you like, in terms of how do we bring this back in, maintain well-being, maintain service delivery. And this is before the resource spending review. If that does translate into a budget, that will compound that quite significantly. So I think it's important just to put a little bit of kind of colour on what are hard numbers, because it does have a profound effect. Thank you.
Thank you, DCO Page. Are there any other questions? Just to re-emphasise this, I've spoken to Grant previously to this meeting, so I would like his committee to look with you on overtime in terms of the service, the people issues, and the authorisation of it. And whilst it's only Q1, and all you accountants feel more comfortable in Q1 than Q3, because that's when the real problems start arising, we look at it early. And I would ask Grant to having a look at overtime to actually talk to the chair of People Committee about any evidence that there may be coming out about the welfare issues on here. These are matters of operational independence of the Chief Constable, but it's right that we hold you to account for the decisions you're making about overtime, especially if they are at this very significant level. So I'll leave that with you, Grant, and informally to speak to Fiona McQueen whether or not she feels that there more might be asked of her committee of the impact, because it's bound, if you're working long hours, it's bound to have you're recompensed on overtime, it's bound to have an impact on yourself and your family.
Yes. Thank you. And yes, I confirm that we are going to be having a look at that. And in discussion before we had this meeting, one of the things that we will be interested in is not just the effect of overtime, but if people are doing all this overtime, they're probably not being able to take annual leave and rest days and so on. So we've got to see how that all ripples through the numbers, as well as the practical impact on the officers concerned. and what that's going to lead to. But certainly, yes, I will discuss with Fiona McQueen how it interacts with what's going to People Committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we shouldn't take it for granted that people are willing to do overtime, so thank you to them, but also thank you for actually trying to manage this issue, DCO Page, with your Chief Financial Officer, in order that we retain a balanced budget, because after all, hitting the target of the budget is very important, critical to the authority, and I know to yourself. Are there any other issues? Tom.
Thanks very much for that. I fully appreciate the challenge that you've got there, and that detailed work will continue through Resources Committee. I do have a concern that you have explained to us only doing health and safety issues with estates, etc. We've been in this discussion several times, and the negative impact and public confidence in the service we deliver and staff welfare and how they feel about their workplace, etc., is so severely affected by that decision and has been previously, and we've come back from it. So I'll just ask that we specifically look at that. Is that the only option we've got to bring this back in? Because I do have real concern that will put us into a difficult place with the staff and with communities.
Points, Tom. That brings us to the end of the public session. Only those involved in presenting papers in a private session can they be here. And we're going to have a 15-minute break. We come back just at the back of 2, say 2:05, to start the private session. And thank you for all your contributions, and thank you for attending.